Mr. De La Cruz just ended a phone call, looking really happy. Using my skills, I moved over $10 million through 4 countries and 12 banks, successfully handling his funds and protecting him from government scrutiny. I'm Tony Cardone, known and respected for my expertise in moving money, hiding funds, and keeping people safe from legal issues. I don't ask where the money comes from, and I don't interfere with their business. To protect myself from legal issues and stay morally upright, I follow a simple rule. Don't ask questions to avoid being lied to. My work has earned me a good income. Using my strategies, I have 16 bank accounts in 8 countries, 10 crypto wallets, and a company that manages my house, cars, bills, and expenses. I receive a $50,000 annual salary from the company, which I use for unexpected expenses. The company makes a small profit yearly to stay legal and protect me from civil suits, lawsuits, or divorces by showing minimal net worth and income. Many clients appreciate my value and offer me things I can't accept as thanks for solving their money problems, such as women, medicaments, trips, protection, and more. Until now, I haven't taken anything from them. My current situation requires me to accept help with surveillance, protection, and some force-related aspects. Business friends were glad to assist and thanked me for my work. My wife, Jen, sees me as a financial advisor, not knowing my earnings, funds, or offshore accounts. She knows the company covers our mortgage, cars, and expenses. She hasn't asked because she doesn't need to work, drives a new luxury car yearly, and has an unlimited budget for shopping and entertainment. I thought Jen was happy and loved being with me. Throughout our 5-year marriage, we had satisfying and frequent closeness, making it feel like paradise. But apparently my paradise is about to face a Category 5 hurricane. Jen and I dated for 2 years, got married at 25, and have been married for 5 years. Jen just turned 30 with attractive features that make her a dream trophy wife. Blonde hair and amazing blue eyes can charm any man. Despite constant attention, she proudly displays her marital status. Before we married, I found out she dated a man named Josh Winters in college. She was madly in love with him, but he enlisted in the Marines, and their relationship eventually fizzled out. Now, I've learned that 8 years later, Josh Winters left the military and came back to our city. Jen couldn't move on from her feelings for him. When Josh finished his 2 tours, he naturally reached out to old friends, including my wife. Jen had always been enchanted by him, and after getting her cell phone number from a mutual friend, he texted and called, trying to reconnect like in the past. Jen started acting differently about 6 weeks ago, probably feeling guilty about her secret communication with Josh. She engaged in excessive attention and additional closeness activities with me, which was pleasant but unusual for Jen. Although she was always cheerful, it was evident from her actions that something had changed. I didn't wait and paid closer attention to Jen. During a weekend barbecue, a friend mentioned Josh, stating he was back in town. I inquired about when he returned, and it coincided with the changes I observed in Jen. The next day, I called a business friend, informed him of the situation, and mentioned I might need his help. He was excited to help me, considering the money I made for him and how I kept him out of trouble with the feds. I provided names and information, and he assured me they would contact me soon. Who knows what these guys do? However, they swiftly provided me with a 4-inch dossier on Josh Winters, containing almost his entire life history, from a copy of his birth certificate to college records, family tree, and military records. I knew more about this guy than his own mother. I also received a daily printout of his text messages, including over 15 messages per day, to my wife. I was told not to ask where they got this information. Initially, the messages were friendly, what you'd expect from an old friend. However, after the first week, they became close. I was relieved to see Jen halt his advances, but after another week of his persistence, he managed to overcome the barriers, and she began to flirt back. My anger grew because I knew Jen still had feelings for him, and I sensed trouble ahead. After 4 weeks of flirting and texting, he convinced Jen to meet him for lunch. Shockingly, he even had the audacity to ask her to wear something handsome for him because he missed her so much. To my horror, she agreed and even asked if she should forget her underwear. My anger reached a level I hadn't felt in a long time, just like old times. I sought advice from my business partners on how to deal with this situation. We agreed it would be best for me to meet them face to face during their lunch, with someone nearby for protection if needed. We knew exactly when and where they would meet, thanks to my friend's surveillance group assisting me with this problem. Entering the restaurant, I found them in a secluded area. Jen wore a revealing dress with a low cut and no bra, making me furious again. They sat together in a private booth with their backs to the restaurant, looking pretty cozy. I noticed a man following me, whom I assumed was one of my bodyguards. Approaching their table, my wife and her friend looked at me when I greeted them casually and slid into the booth across from them. The large man who had been watching me now sat 3 tables away, looking at Jen with a friendly smile. I inquired if my wife would introduce me to her friend, sensing the tension in the air as I locked eyes with Jen. Josh appeared confused when he glanced at me, while my wife displayed a mix of shock and guilt. They continued sitting side by side, holding hands on the table. Once she realized the situation, she attempted to free her hand from Josh's grasp, but he held it tightly, giving me a knowing smirk that conveyed he wasn't backing down. My wife nervously introduced Josh as Josh Winters and gestured towards me, her husband, Tony. I'd never seen her so uneasy. Josh seemed amused, maintaining a silent confidence as if to communicate, "I've got your wife, and there's nothing you can do about it, buddy." Remaining composed, I addressed Jen, expressing my need to talk to her privately for a few minutes. I requested him to let her step away from the table. He reluctantly let go of her hand, allowing her to leave the booth. She stood up, clutching her purse to her chest, standing between Josh and me, appearing scared and worried. I took her hand and led her to the back of the restaurant towards the restrooms. Still nervous and feeling guilty about being caught with Josh, she walked quietly. Without saying a word, I pulled her into the empty men's room and started addressing the situation. I mentioned her lack of a bra and the revealing dress, expressing confusion and hurt about her apparent disrespect. She stood there, shedding tears without uttering a word. Then I raised the hem of her dress to verify the absence of underwear. Seeing my expression change from horror to rage, she observed as I held the dress above her waist and turned her to face the mirror, forcing her to confront her reflection. I pointed out the lack of underwear, expressing my dissatisfaction with her dressing when I'm not around. She screamed, pulling her dress down to cover herself. She insisted, "No, it's not what it looks like. I know it sounds bad, but I have a good explanation, and you will understand. I promise to explain." In a commanding and stern tone, unlike anything she had heard from me before, I spoke slowly, emphasizing every word. I communicated the need for a discussion and laid out the terms, making it clear that if she wanted any hope of remaining married, she needed to comply with my directives. Otherwise, our marriage would end immediately. You're going to grab your purse, walk out looking straight ahead without acknowledging your boyfriend. Go straight to your car, drive home, put on the coffee pot, and wait for me to come back. I'll be no more than 10 minutes late. Don't text or call your boyfriend or anyone until we talk. I'll talk to your boyfriend and explain why you had to leave. I noticed she avoided eye contact, probably feeling guilty about getting caught. And one more thing. When you arrive home, don't change your clothes. Stay in this dress. Wait for me in the same way. If you don't follow my request, don't bother coming home tonight. I'll call you later and explain how things will develop from now on. Oh my God, what have I done? When Josh approached me, I was relieved to find out he was safe and no longer in the military, as I always worried about his well-being. Josh was my first love, and it took me a long time to get over him. Even though we went our separate ways after he left me years ago, and there was no longer any love between us, thoughts of him lingered. I am certain I love Tony, my life partner since we met. I would never want to lose him or cause him pain. That's why this situation is so challenging. Darn it. Josh started flirting and saying things he knew would provoke me. He had a way of making me feel like a schoolgirl and doing things against my will. I despised that I couldn't resist. I tried to push him away, but his persistent flirting and suggestive messages wore me down until I eventually agreed to meet him for lunch. Talking to him made me feel guilty and mean. I knew I shouldn't be doing this, and I should have told Tony about Josh's return and our conversation, but I kept it a secret, and the regret is overwhelming. Josh has a knack for making me feel connected to him. When he asked me to wear something handsome, I agreed, knowing it was wrong, and that I shouldn't even be going to lunch with him, let alone wearing that dress. Yet I did it. What made me suggest going without underwear? Am I truly that shallow and foolish? Yes. When we dated, he always insisted I go without them. When he invited me to lunch, old memories flooded back, and it felt normal. I almost declined due to guilt, but a text from Josh saying he couldn't wait changed my course. It was tough not telling Tony, but I thought one dinner for old times' sake wouldn't be a big deal. Just a couple of hours. Just like old times. Just like he said. Josh knew how to persuade me even when I resisted. To be honest, when I saw him in the restaurant, I felt a certain desire. Our chemistry was special, and now he looked even prettier than I remembered. 8 years in the Marine Corps sculpted muscles that any woman would admire. My face turned red as he kissed me and helped me into a private booth. It felt like old times, laughter, happiness, and excitement. When he held my hand on the table, I felt safe and warm. We were there for just a few minutes, laughing and enjoying ourselves, when out of nowhere, Tony appeared in front of us. Suddenly, he sat down right in front of us with a sadistic smile, sending a chill down my spine. My heart stopped as I realized the gravity of my actions. When Tony saw us holding hands, my world crumbled. I saw pain and anger in his eyes, and I wanted to jump over the table, hug him, and tell him how much I loved him, easing his pain. I could never intentionally hurt Tony, but that's exactly what happened. The way he looked at me with disgust and contempt shattered my heart. The man I love, who I've been with for the last 5 years, saw me with another man, an old flame. I was paralyzed and speechless, not knowing what to do. When Tony said he wanted to talk, my heart sank, anticipating the end of our relationship. As he pulled me into the men's room, I didn't know what to expect. When he lifted my dress to reveal I wasn't wearing underwear, I nearly fainted. I can only imagine what he was thinking. In that moment, I felt like a fallen and unfaithful wife. When he told me to go home and wait for him, the gravity of his words scared me. I knew I had to listen to save our marriage and make him understand why I did this. I need to fix this and agree with whatever he says. When he mentioned talking to Josh alone, I got worried for Tony. Josh is much bigger and has 8 years of Marine training. I feared Tony might get hurt. I wanted to tell him not to do it, but I felt confused. I tried to apologize, but Tony insisted I go home, saying he would be there soon. When he told me not to change clothes, I realized I was in trouble, and explaining my actions would be difficult. How did I let Josh convince me to do this? I didn't want him in my life. I just wanted to reminisce and have some fun. From Tony's perspective, though, I looked like I was about to have bed life with Josh. Darn it. How can I fix this? I felt like everyone was watching me as I walked to my car. I didn't dare look at Josh, and I knew he wondered where I was going. It took a few minutes before I stopped crying enough to drive home. It felt like the longest trip ever. Seeing pain in Tony's eyes made me cry again. How could I do this to him? I can't believe I let Josh manipulate me like that. Now I have to make Tony understand and forgive me. Darn, I'm in such a mess, all because of Josh and my stupidity. When I got home, I made coffee and wondered about their conversation. How long before Tony comes home? Will he be angry? Can I salvage our marriage? I need to. I don't want to live without Tony, and he must know he's the only one I love. I went back to the table and talked to Josh. Well, it seems Jen won't be returning, and I just wanted to talk to you. You must know she still has feelings for you and is easily manipulated, as you've seen today and over the past few weeks. But understand, she's married to me and I won't share her. I'm not possessive or reckless. Today, I decided to give Jen a choice. Either stay in our marriage or leave me for him, but not both. She would decide without his influence. I expressed that if she chose him, so be it. However, if she wanted to stay, she would have to cut contact with him. I made it clear that if he didn't hear from her today, he shouldn't call or text again. I emphasized that she was a grown woman making her own decisions and didn't belong to him. He confidently asserted that she would be with him again, claiming she couldn't resist their past with the same smirk. In response, I addressed Josh, expressing hope that he would be reasonable. I acknowledged his attractiveness and size, suggesting there were plenty of single women interested in him. I questioned why individuals like him couldn't leave married women alone. I proceeded to reveal my knowledge about him and his life, mentioning details such as his parents' names, the love for their dogs, the duration since he last saw his sister in Austin, and his best friend Billy's girlfriend being pregnant with a boy. I pointed out his persistence in text messages to Jen and warned him that my work friends, who owed me a lot, were ruthless. I challenged him, stating that tonight would determine who the better man was. I mentioned my willingness to be objective and respect her choice, even if she picked him. I asserted that I wouldn't live with a woman who desired another man and wouldn't share her. Although it would be painful, I preferred to let her go and move on. In the event that she chose to remain faithful, I outlined that there would be changes. Both of them had damaged my trust, and it needed to be rebuilt. I informed him that if she stayed with me, he would have no more contact, no texts, emails, calls, or reaching out to friends. He would vanish from her life. If you happen to see her in a restaurant, turn and walk away. At a party or club, leave if you spot her. Don't try anything behind my back or contact her, as the pain you'll feel will be beyond anything you've experienced. Your loved ones will pay for your stupidity. Do you understand what I said? Do you grasp how serious I am? Josh sat there, stunned, not knowing what to think. How do you know so much about my family and my life? Like I said, I have friends who owe me favors, and they're not people you want to get involved with. I might seem meek, but there's more to me than meets the eye. Are you really going to offer her a chance to leave you for me? I keep my word. Yes. If she were any other woman who disrespected me like today, I'd have kicked her out. But I love her, and I'll give her one chance. If you're right and she can't resist you, by midnight, she'll contact you. The other choice is to forget you, keep my vows, and remain her faithful husband. If she stays, you'll be dead to her. No more interference in our marriage. Josh expressed his belief that I should keep my word about letting them live in peace because, according to him, she would want to be with him. He claimed she had told him as much and emphasized how much she desired him, attempting to sound confident. His foolishness made me wonder if there was any truth to his words, a question that would be answered soon. As I left, the man in the shadows stood up, cast an angry look at Josh, and then departed. A minute after my departure, Josh received a message indicating that I had a bodyguard, challenging the assumption that I was an innocent, meek husband. While driving home, I pondered whether the woman I loved would ever be in my bed again. I questioned whether she would choose him and leave me or remain true to her vows. Upon entering the house, the atmosphere was quiet. She sat nervously at the kitchen table, tears in her eyes. Pouring myself coffee, I took a seat across from her. I addressed Jen, stating that I knew everything, including her texts, to Josh. I mentioned having friends in my business who owed me favors, individuals she would prefer not to meet. Despite her apologies, I conveyed that they were now meaningless. She had betrayed my love, and her actions that day had shown a level of disrespect for me as her husband that I had never anticipated. You know me, and I've made it clear that I won't tolerate living with a woman who doesn't respect me, our vows, and the sanctity of our marriage. In my world, cheating extends beyond the physical. Even the mere thought of being with another man is a betrayal. Actions such as engaging in conversations with Josh, wearing a provocative dress without a bra, suggesting not wearing underwear, all of these are considered lies. The act of sitting together and holding hands, especially in my eyes, constitutes treason. Collectively, these actions indicate that you gave your love to a man outside our marriage. Admittedly, there was no kissing, which is the sole reason we are still having this conversation. However, I want to make it clear that I will never share you, and I won't tolerate a cheating wife. I know you were close to Josh, and I understand you still have feelings for him. However, you're married to me, and I won't share you with him or anyone else. I haven't asked you to leave because I love you deeply and will do anything to keep us together. Before we continue, I have a question. Don't lie, I might already know. While sitting with him without underwear, did he touch you? Has anyone else in our marriage touched you there? No, I swear never, only you. Today, she was willing to let him. I questioned her, and she lowered her head, crying, apologizing for her actions. She expressed regret and asked for forgiveness. I acknowledged that, apart from a few handshakes and text messages, nothing had happened to end our marriage. However, I expressed disappointment and questioned her choice of dress, asking if she had planned to seduce him and get him into bed. She denied any intention of sleeping with him, explaining that she wanted to look handsome for him and relive old feelings. Despite understanding her past feelings for Josh, I emphasized that I would never share her with another man and presented her with a choice. I laid out the options. She could choose between Josh and our marriage. If she wanted to be with him, I would let her go, ensuring a fair divorce and safety for both. On the other hand, she could stay in our marriage, remain faithful, and honor our vows. I made it clear that if she chose Josh, she would need to leave the house by the weekend, and I would initiate divorce proceedings. If she chose to stay married, she would have to cut all ties with Josh. I emphasized the gravity of her decision and left her with the ultimatum, stating that she had a get-out-of-jail card, but needed to choose wisely. I then left the kitchen, instructing her to sit and think about it. I conveyed that if she chose Josh, I would ask her to leave the house with her belongings by the weekend, initiating divorce proceedings immediately. I made it clear that if she wanted to stay married, she could not be involved with Josh again, emphasizing that he would be dead to her. I reiterated the same demands I had communicated to Josh, ensuring that there should be no possibility of them being in the same place at the same time. She agreed without hesitation. Before leaving the kitchen, I emphasized the gravity of her choice, presenting it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I instructed her to choose between her ex-lover and her loving husband, stating that I needed an answer when I returned from the shower. As I left the kitchen, she spontaneously declared, "Of course I choose you, honey. I love you and don't want anyone else." Despite hearing her words, I insisted that she sit and think about it carefully. If we were to stay married, she would need to rebuild the trust we once had and help me overcome the pain and anger she had caused. I stressed the difficulty of this task and urged her to give me her answer after I returned from the shower. Considering her actions and feelings for Josh, I emphasized that this decision was too significant for her to make without deep inner reflection. After taking my time showering and getting dressed, I returned to the kitchen. She ran up to me, expressing love and remorse, promising never to leave me and vowing to be the perfect wife. She declared her desire to have my children and pleaded for me not to leave her, emphasizing that I was the only man in her life. We shared moments of kissing and hugging, and then I carried her to our bed, feeling a sense of having my wife back. Fueled by anger, my actions led to a closeness encounter with this beautiful woman, who willingly surrendered herself to me. She expressed love, urging me to take her, pulling me closer and kissing me tenderly. We shared a prolonged moment of closeness, reaching emotional highs together. Afterward, we silently embraced for an hour, feeling a sense of reconnection as the world around us faded away. We embraced the roles of husband and wife again, confident that nothing would ever come between us. The following day, Josh concluded, "She didn't call me, so I guess she decided to stay with this idiot. I can't believe this." Our connection and her actions made me think she would want to stay with me. If I could have gotten her into bed that day, she would have left Tony in a heartbeat. As soon as I can do this, she will be mine again. Her husband really messed up my plans. Who is this guy, and how does he know so much about me and my family? Well, I'm not done yet, and I think I can get her back. Sorry, Tony, but you're going to lose this girl. A few days later, idiot. Josh finally texted Jen, trying to convince her to leave me and be with him, which didn't surprise me. The good news was that Jenna showed me the text message and didn't respond to it. I told her I had already seen his message and was glad she didn't respond. Showing me the text was a smart step towards repairing our trust issues. The following day, I sent a text to Josh, inquiring about his parents' success in finding Casey and Mickey. Josh promptly called his parents, learning about their distress upon discovering the dogs were missing. He realized that his involvement with Jen had hurt his parents, despite Tony's previous warning. To emphasize the seriousness of the situation, I made the dogs disappear for a few days under close supervision after Tony's warning. Josh called me back immediately after speaking with his parents, expressing anger and concern. He demanded to know what I had done and issued a threat, stating that if the dogs weren't alive, he would do bad things to me. I responded by reminding him of my earlier warning not to mess with Jen, and emphasizing the pain he would feel if he got involved with her. I assured him it was just a temporary disruption and that the dogs would be back soon. However, I made it clear that this was his final warning and insisted that he never contact Jen again. Josh acknowledged the warning, but stressed that the dogs better come back in good shape, since he had ignored my earlier instructions. I declared my intention to take whatever actions I deemed necessary, and Josh would have to face the consequences. In response to his threat, I informed him that the return of the dogs was uncertain, as his tone did not inspire mercy. I contemplated whether they would come back at all, emphasizing his disrespectful tone. I suggested that perhaps his parents should know the reason their puppies had gone missing, teasing the idea of calling them. Josh, realizing the severity of the situation, apologized and pleaded for the return of the dogs, promising to stay away. I accepted his apology, but warned that next time, it wouldn't be the dogs disappearing. He agreed to stay out of Jen's life, and I assured him that the dogs would be back soon. However, I reminded him of my physical distance and lack of control over everything, stating that the people involved had their own opinions. I promised to discuss the matter with them and see what could be done. I expressed my hope that we wouldn't need to have another conversation, warning Josh that if we did, he would be dealing with much more significant issues. At 3 o'clock the next night, Josh's parents experienced tears of joy upon the return of their beloved dogs, who were barking on their porch. Unaware of what had transpired and that their son had been involved, they felt immense relief. Josh, upon hearing the news, expressed relief at the return of the dogs and sent me a brief thank you message. Subsequently, he grasped the gravity of the situation, distanced himself from Jen, and secured a job in another city several hours away. Despite attempting to gather more information about me, Josh could only access public details, indicating that I worked as a financial advisor. Realizing that additional information was sealed, he decided to move on and start a new life, severing ties with his old flame. Concerned about the possibility of Josh re-entering her life, I took proactive measures. 2 weeks after the incident, I presented Jen with a postnuptial agreement, drafted by my lawyer. The agreement outlined her willingness to relinquish everything, including rights to any children born during our marriage in the event of infidelity. While it couldn't prevent a recurrence of her previous encounter with Josh, it provided ample incentive for her to consider the consequences, given my increased attention and the knowledge that I would consistently check in on her. Alongside the post-nuptial agreement, we faced any potential challenges that lay ahead. Approximately a year later, Jen became pregnant with their first child, and the couple grew closer than ever. Recognizing the close call that nearly jeopardized her life, Jen committed herself to making me happy and strengthening our family. The specter of Josh gradually faded, and it seemed as if he had never existed. Despite the potential for irreparable damage in a single day, my love and approach towards challenges played a pivotal role in saving our marriage.
From a young age, I was captivated by the idea of flying. While other kids played with toy cars or dreamed of being athletes, I imagined soaring through the clouds free from the ground. Growing up, my family wasn't wealthy, so I worked hard to pursue my dream of becoming a pilot. Despite the challenges, that dream fueled every decision I made. As I got older, I took on any job I could find to save for flight school, whether it was late shifts at the diner or mowing lawns. When I finally earned my pilot's license, all that hard work paid off. Soon after, I began flying for the Air National Guard. However, after my time with the Guard ended, I faced a hiring freeze with the major airlines, leaving me working for a smaller regional airline. Through it all, Amita, my wife, was my constant. Amy came from an even poorer background than I did, but we stuck together from 3rd grade on. I told her in junior high that I'd be a pilot, and she said, "Take me with you." I promised, and we got married as soon as we could. Amy was nearly 6 feet tall, slender, with freckles, big ears, and a large nose. To me, she was the most beautiful bride. She followed me everywhere during my career, making our home cozy no matter where we were. She was great at saving money, haggling for everything we needed, though she had a weakness for postcards, which she collected from every place we went. We bought a fixer-upper house with our savings and my modest salary of just over $25,000 as a regional airline pilot. I didn't mind. I had Amy and the chance to fly every day. She found work with a real estate developer, and we worked together to make ends meet. Life was good, despite the slow airline hiring market. We made the best of every moment, enjoying each other and the life we built. Every morning, Jose, our head mechanic, gave me a ride to work. He helped me a lot with my truck, and we had rebuilt almost every part of it together. Jose had escaped Cuba with his girlfriend, now wife Maria, at 18, and he was proud of his big family, especially his kids. One morning, I rode with Jose and his youngest son, Angelo, a high school freshman. I greeted them, buckled in, and mentioned needing to stop by Amy's workplace to drop off her cell phone, which she had forgotten. Angelo, like most teens, was listening to music on his headphones, but noticed the phone in my hand. Curious, he asked to see it. I tossed him the phone, and soon after, he commented, "Someone's gonna get lucky today," showing me a message on Amy's screen. The message read, "Protein lunch day 2. Confused, I asked what it meant, and Angelo showed me more texts between Amy and a man named Troy, her boss. They were clearly having an affair. The shock hit me hard. I felt sick and asked Jose to take me home immediately. Angelo forwarded the messages to me, and I confirmed the sender was Troy Kingston, Amy's boss at King One Developers. It felt like a terrible cliche, my wife having an affair with her boss. Jose, noticing my distress, offered to take me to the doctor, but I declined. I just needed to get home. Angelo continued reading the messages aloud, each one making me feel worse. When we finally arrived home, I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. As I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, I remembered how Amy and I had remodeled that bathroom together. Those memories only deepened the hurt I was feeling. Maybe Amy's cheating, I thought, feeling uneasy. Troy Kingston, her boss, was in his 50s, nearly 20 years older than us. He fit the typical real estate developer stereotype, tall, trim, tanned, with dyed hair and plugs to hide his bald spots. He had a big voice and loved cracking jokes, both clean and crude. Trying to calm myself, I hoped it was just one of his jokes. I decided to stop by Amy's office, using the excuse of taking her to lunch, and figure out what was going on. It was almost 11:30 a.m., and I hurried to her office. At King One Developers, I told the receptionist I needed to return Amy's phone. After making a few calls, she said Amy wasn't available. I explained I already had her number since I was holding her phone. The receptionist then mentioned she saw Amy leave with Mr. Kingston and that they often had lunch at his house or the club. Ignoring the knot in my stomach, I said I'd find her later. I drove to Troy's house, which I'd been to once for a Christmas party. It was a big, flashy mansion with an Olympic pool and a red Hummer H2 parked outside, indicating they were inside. The front door was unlocked, so I walked in and heard noise from the upstairs bedroom. With my heart racing, I dialed Amy's phone. From behind the door, I heard it ringing, muffled inside the bedroom. I stepped back, bracing for what might come next. "Troy Kingston," a voice answered. "Hey, Troy," I said through Amy's phone. "She left her phone at home. The office said she's with you. Can you tell me where you are so I can bring it to her? Better yet, let me talk to Amy." "Kevin, we're heading back to the office from the club," Troy replied. "We just finished a lunch meeting with a client and stopped by my house to grab some paperwork. Amy's in the restroom." Standing just outside the bedroom, I listened as Troy lied. I cracked the door open and saw him shout toward the bathroom, "Amy, your husband's calling." Amy, wrapped in a towel, casually sat on the bed. The way they acted around each other made it clear this wasn't new. "Hey, Kevin," Amy said, taking the phone from Troy. She flirted with him as she spoke to me, pretending nothing was wrong. "Thanks for finding my phone. I've been looking everywhere for it." I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. They froze. "Well, Amy," I said, pointing at her, "I don't think you'll find your phone between Troy's legs." Troy bolted into the bathroom, slamming the door. Amy stayed on the bed. "Get dressed," I said. "We need to talk." "No," Amy replied calmly. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I like living this way." I was shocked. "You enjoy being a cheating liar?" "I'm sorry you found out this way, Kevin," she said, unfazed. "But I want a better life than what you can give me. Troy can provide that now, not in a few years like you might." "This is what you're trading our marriage for?" I asked, gesturing around the room. "I'm not throwing anything away," Amy said, still calm. "I followed you for 15 years, living like a pauper, but I deserve better now. I'm tired of clipping coupons and shopping for sales. I want more, and Troy can give it to me. I ask you to respect my decision." I was speechless. "Respect what, Amy? You cheating and Troy hiding in the bathroom?" She just shrugged. The room felt suffocating. I tossed the phone back to her and walked out, flipping her off as I left. "You two deserve each other. I have flights tomorrow. Get out of my house." For the rest of the month, I was in a daze. They say grief has 7 stages, but I was stuck in shock and denial for 2 weeks. How could Amy do this? Had I missed the signs? As a professional, I was trained to notice small details before they became big issues, Yet I completely lost awareness in my own life. Every morning I woke up expecting to see Amy, and then the painful memories would hit, starting the cycle all over again. By the third week, the emotional pain set in, worse than any physical injury. Amy had shattered my heart, and the grief was unbearable. Jose and his wife Maria were my lifeline. They were the only ones I confided in, and they were just as stunned. Leaving a spouse was incomprehensible to them. Jose had taken a bullet during their escape from Cuba, and Maria had nursed him on a raft until they were rescued. They both worked tirelessly to build a life in America while raising 6 children. Their love and loyalty were unwavering. At the end of the month, anger hit when the bank called. I was overdrawn. Amy had emptied all our accounts. I couldn't get a new line of credit, and the bank refused to help, as Troy Kingston was a big client. To top it off, a man served me divorce papers by my truck. Realizing I was in serious trouble, I researched the situation. Amy was claiming the repairs on my old truck were equal to her new Camry, and she had cashed out all our assets. She offered me the house with an inflated appraisal, leaving me 10 days to avoid foreclosure. Jose's son, a law student, reviewed the papers with his professor. He warned me I was at a disadvantage. Amy had powerful lawyers thanks to her new relationship. I would lose the legal battle. Needing money fast, I sold my truck for $7,000, which helped me stave off foreclosure and cover some bills. For the next year, when I wasn't flying, I worked with Maria's cleaning crews and biked everywhere to save money. I lived extremely frugally, surviving mostly on the home-cooked meals Jose and Maria insisted I eat. Maria tried setting me up with Latina women, but I couldn't even afford a soda, let alone a date. By the start of my second year, my divorce was behind me, and I was starting to get ahead. I even took some time off to work on the house. One day I found boxes of Amy's old postcards. My first thought was to burn them for warmth. Instead, I rode my bike to the library and emailed Amy about the postcards. She replied within an hour. "The postcards are where I've been, not where I'm going. Do what you want with them." I printed both emails from my records and went home. That night, I built a big fire and roasted marshmallows while watching those cards burn. For the first time, I slept peacefully and woke up without thinking about Amy. Over 2 years had passed since I last saw Amy. One Friday night, while taxiing onto the runway, a flight attendant told me about an unruly passenger who wouldn't turn off his phone. I offered to handle it, expecting the usual resolution: a stern word and compliance. To my surprise, the passenger was Troy Kingston, drunk and shouting on his phone. Even more shocking was his companion, my ex-wife Amy, barely recognizable. She was covered in jewelry, with bleached blonde hair, a nose job, plumped lips, and plastic surgery everywhere. I realized where all the money had gone. "Good thing Amy didn't waste it," I muttered. Switching to professional mode, I approached Troy. "Mr. Kingston, you need to turn off your phone for the safety of the flight." Troy snapped. "Back off, flyboy. I'm closing a deal worth more than you and this airline." I turned to Amy, asking her to reason with him. She stared out the window, ignoring me. Sighing, I returned to the cockpit and announced over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be returning to the terminal briefly. Thank you for your patience." My first officer had already taken us back to the gate where airport security was waiting. Troy Kingston's day took a turn when 3 loud airport police officers, followed by a Homeland Security agent, boarded the plane. Troy was let off in handcuffs, facing charges for interfering with the crew and endangering the aircraft, federal offenses since we were on the runway. The DHS officer told me Troy would spend the weekend in a holding cell, as federal courts don't operate on weekends, and he'd also be placed on the no-fly list for 90 days. To add insult to injury, Troy was billed for the fuel, landing time, and ground crew expenses. Well, couldn't happen to a nicer guy, I thought as we taxied back out. Later, I was sitting at Jose and Maria's kitchen table, celebrating their daughter starting medical school. Jose, proud of her, beamed. "She's going to be a rocket surgeon." I smiled, declining more drinks. Seeing their happiness reminded me of what I had lost with Amy. "Not like that, worthless Amy," Maria said bluntly. "Captain, let me find you a nice Latina. I'll treat you good." I smirked. Maria, with her thick accent, was always trying to set me up. "I'm a bit hesitant after last time," I joked. Maria mumbled something to Jose in Spanish. "Captain, you're better off without her." No argument, I shrugged. Scooting closer, Maria added, "Amy didn't know what she had. Her life isn't so happy now." Curious, I asked, "Come on, Maria, what do you know?" Maria, with her network of cleaners and housekeepers, had the best gossip around, rivaling any intelligence agency. Maria leaned in and whispered, "My girls say Amy's not doing well. The other wives call her lemon pie because they're afraid she'll steal their husbands. Amy throws parties, but no wives show up. Just some husbands who look at her like she's a piece of meat, which makes her and Mr. Kingston mad. So, no more parties." I tried not to laugh. Maria continued, "Amy's upset because Kingston won't marry her. He doesn't give her much money and he doesn't trust her. He checks her phone and hired a private detective to watch her. When Amy found out, she was furious." I poured a drink. "Well, Maria, what did you expect? There's no trust between thieves. They can enjoy living in constant suspicion." Maria wasn't finished. "I send older ladies to clean for Mr. Kingston. He's always trying to touch the younger ones, but Amy blames the girls and complains that they treat him badly. I know it's not true." "If Amy can't keep him happy, why blame the staff?" I said sarcastically. "No one wants to work there anyway. He never tips." Maria laughed, and Jose jumped in to change the subject. "Captain, we're going golfing tomorrow. I won a round at Nine Rivers and a raffle." "Golf? You play, Jose?" I asked, surprised. Jose nodded. "When we came to America, Maria noticed successful people play golf, so she bought me clubs on sale and made me take lessons, even the kids. But she never lets me rent a golf cart." Maria gave him a stern look. "We're saving for the kids' college. God gave you legs. Use them." Jose raised his hands in mock surrender, but smiled, taking Maria's hand. I finished my drink, wished them good night, and headed home. The next day, Jose brought his son's golf clubs for me to use, as I had sold mine after the divorce for extra cash. It was the first time in a while that I wasn't flying, working, or doing house chores, and I was having a great time. However, my mood soured when I saw a large photo of Troy Kingston and Amy hanging in the clubhouse. Troy, a board member of Nine Rivers Country Club, was pictured with Amy at an event. Sensing my frustration, Jose noticed the photo too. "Captain," Jose said, "keep an eye on the entrance and let me know if anyone's coming." Confused, I stood guard for a few minutes. Finally, Jose said, "All clear. Let's go." When I turned around, I saw he had drawn a handlebar mustache, devil horns, and crooked teeth on Troy's picture. And he didn't spare Amy either, giving her a big nose and huge ears. "What are you, 12? I laughed, but my mood had lifted. "Let's go play golf," Jose grinned. We were having a blast. At the 7th hole, we noticed an elderly man ahead taking a shot. Suddenly, he collapsed, clutching his chest. Jose and I dropped our bags and ran to help while his wife frantically tried to call for help. The man wasn't breathing. "Jose, start CPR," I ordered, beginning chest compressions. "Call emergency," I shouted to the woman. "I don't have a signal," she screamed, panicking. Neither Jose nor I had cell coverage either. "You have to run to the clubhouse," I yelled at her. She hesitated but finally ran off. Jose and I continued CPR, but after 10 exhausting minutes, we were struggling. Just as I was about to give mouth-to-mouth, an electric golf cart zoomed up, nearly running over my foot. The girl driving the beverage cart jumped out, grabbed a small hard case, and knelt beside me. Inside was a portable defibrillator, like the ones in airports. "Stand back," she said, ripping open the man's shirt and attaching the sensors. "Jose, get help," she ordered. Jose sped off in the cart while she followed the defibrillator's instructions and pressed the shock button. The man's chest jolted, and his eyes fluttered open. "He's breathing, but he needs medical help fast," she said. I wiped my forehead and glanced at her, a young, slender woman with a name tag that read, Lords. Just then, a Ford F-250 truck pulled up, driven by Jose. "Recognize your old truck, Captain?" he joked. "The golf cart died." We loaded the man into the truck, Lords riding up front, and I took the driver's seat. As we tore across the golf course, Lords directed me to a path, but I insisted on my own route, familiar from countless flights overhead. Lords was on the phone with the hospital, rattling off medical jargon. I quipped, "Not bad for a drink cart, girl." She shot back, "I'm a nurse, dumbass." I could only manage, "Oh," as we screeched into the emergency entrance, where doctors were waiting. For a week, Jose and I were airport heroes. But soon after, I got a letter from the Nine Rivers Country Club, billing me $247.88 for course damages. They threatened legal action if I didn't pay, but I just laughed and tossed it in the trash. It's hard to get something from nothing, I thought. I never learned if the man recovered, but he was airlifted out soon after stabilizing. I tried calling Lords, only to find she no longer worked at the club. After a week of searching, I asked Maria for help, and within 15 minutes, she had all of Lords' info, from her phone number to her shoe size. thanks to her network of Latina women. Maria started talking about Lourdes as if she were giving a formal report. Lourdes is 26 years old, the only daughter of her father, an immigrant laborer she cared for until he passed away. Her mother died when Lourdes was a child. She's never been married, recently got her nursing degree, but hasn't taken the exam yet, and works the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift at Mercy Nursing Home. She rents a room, isn't seeing anyone, and loves vanilla ice cream with sprinkles. That's it, Maria teased with a grin. No birthmarks, no warrants. She gave me a smug look. Lourdes is a good girl. She goes to Mass every Sunday at St. Paul's. Want me to set you two up? She reached into her pocket for her phone. No, Maria, I jumped up. Thanks for the phone and Lourdes' address. I'll take it from here. I heard Maria laughing as I left her house. The next day, Lourdes was sitting on her front steps when I approached with flowers. She smiled when she saw the surprise on my face. Why'd you wait so long, Kevin? How did you know I was coming? I stammered. The Latina Women's Network works both ways, Kevin. Lourdes laughed as she stood, took the flowers, and headed up the stairs. You haven't had a chance. Stay here while I put these in water. Lourdes was easy to talk to. She shared how she balanced school, nursing homework, and a job delivering drinks at the Nine Rivers Country Club until recently. Kevin, Lourdes began, I had a lot of debt from loans and tuition. My nursing home job covers rent and living expenses. The good money from serving drinks helped me pay off the debt, save for the nursing exam prep, and cover the testing fees. What happened to the Nine Rivers job? I asked. Lourdes wrinkled her nose. After that little monster truck ride, the board fired me. They said I left early. I know it was that board member, Troy Kingston. He's been trying to sleep with me since I started there. Now he entertains his secretary every Wednesday during lunch. Lourdes shuddered. I wasn't shocked Lourdes knew about my situation and marriage. The Latina Women's Network circulated a lot of gossip. Some of it was exaggerated, and much of it was wrong, as I'd found out. You know, Kevin, Lourdes said, most of the gossip says your wife left because she switched teams. Some think it's because you were gay. Suppressing a laugh, I asked, where did that come from? Lourdes looked slightly embarrassed. Some girls on the cleaning crew were more than interested in helping you through your grief. The skirts got shorter and the blouses lower. You never reacted, so they figured you must be gay. I laughed. You must mean Anita and Orlando. There's no way I missed their attempts to cheer me up. I slapped my knee. Lourdes, tell them I appreciate it, but I have a strict rule. How to put this? I don't eat where I trailed off, grinning. Lourdes chuckled. Good, I'm glad you noticed. Did your ex-wife not have that rule about work? To be blunt, I replied, Amy can eat crap. I wanted to see more of Lourdes. Kevin, I'm not a prude, but I'm not much to look at, Lourdes said. Can we meet tomorrow? I'm working on the house tomorrow, having trouble with the door hinge, I said. Maybe you made the mortise holes too shallow. How did you adjust the reveal? She asked. Morty, what? I was confused. Lourdes rolled her eyes. Oh, Kevin, just give me your address. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Lourdes grew up around her dad, a laborer and handyman. What she knew about home repair rivaled the crew from this old house. If she didn't know something, she'd bring a retired craftsman from the nursing home to teach us. We spent every spare moment together, growing closer each time. But it wasn't the closeness I had expected. The night went great, and the morning even better. I'd been thinking about something for a while. Lourdes, will you move in with me? I asked. Lourdes raised an eyebrow. Kevin, I'm not the type of girl who moves in after one good night. Lourdes, I want you in my bed every night, I said, admiring her. But it's also practical. It'd be cheaper to live together than apart. You'll save on rent and reach your goals faster, passing the nursing exam and all that. I'm not a freeloader, Kevin. I'm not trading myself for a place to stay, she said, crossing her arms. I always pay my way. You'll still pay, I teased, grabbing her towel. You can keep fixing up the house for rent. Honestly, I should be paying you for everything you've done. I get more out of this deal. Lourdes threw the towel back and sat on the bed, thinking. I held my breath, waiting. Finally, she turned and said, Kevin, do you think your friend Jose will lend us his truck to move my stuff on Friday? We'd been together over 6 months now. The house had never been in better shape, and I was happy. I still worked, cleaning houses and logging as many flight hours as the FAA allowed, but Lourdes had changed my life. I wanted to propose, but knew she wanted to get her nursing license and establish her career before settling down. The housing market crash hit our town hard, and no company felt it more than King One Developers, where Troy Kingston worked. Within a week, the company collapsed like a house of cards. The bank pulled several loans, and Troy's entire operation fell apart. Federal regulators started investigating, and it turned out Troy had mixed funds, mortgaged properties he didn't even own, and was over-leveraged in real estate. He didn't even have enough money to file for bankruptcy. Troy, facing overwhelming challenges, made a tragic decision one night. He drove into his garage and never came out. I felt sorry for the financial mess he left behind for others, but not for him. Oddly, I didn't even think about how this would affect my ex-wife Amy. She was in my past, and I was focused on my future with Lords. A few weeks later, as I walked home from the bus stop, I saw a figure sitting on my porch steps. It was dusk, but even in the dim light, I could tell who it was. "Hi, Amy," I said, standing over her. "Hi, Kevin," she replied, looking up at me but not moving from the steps. "Amy, I'd love to say it's good to see you, but that would be a lie. I've had a long day and just want to get inside." Amy didn't budge. "Why are you walking, Kevin? Where's your truck?" "You're sitting on it," I said dryly. Amy looked around, confused. "Oh, you sold it for the house. I get it, but why, Kevin? You loved that truck." "I loved a lot of things back then, Amy," I said coldly. "You learn to live without things when you have to. That truck never let me down, unlike other things, and I still miss that truck to this day." "What about me, Kevin? Do you ever miss me?" Amy asked softly. "Of course, Amy," I said sarcastically. "I miss you with every bullet." Amy sighed, but I kept going. "Besides, how could I miss you? You're still here." "Kevin, please, can we talk? I just got out of the hospital 2 weeks ago," she pleaded. "I'm sorry to hear that, and I wish you a speedy recovery," I replied indifferently. "But I don't see how your health concerns me anymore. You made it clear years ago that I wasn't enough for you." "Kevin, please, Troy's dead. That night, I almost died too." "Yeah, I heard. His little stunt in the garage nearly took you with him," I said. "I guess those Hummers really are bad for the environment. Maybe you should have convinced Troy to go hybrid." "That's not funny, Kevin." "I'm not trying to be funny, Amy," I said, rubbing my chin. "I'm tired. Maybe we should just go our separate ways." "Kevin, please," she begged. "Let's just go inside for a few minutes. I need to talk to you." I sighed and motioned toward the door. As Amy struggled to stand, I noticed how tall she still was, but her face had changed. It wasn't just the plastic surgery, something else was off. In the fading light, I saw she was using a cane, leaning heavily on it. I quietly picked up her gym bag as she climbed the steps. Opening the door, I thought, this is going to be one hell of a conversation. Amy and I sat at the dining room table. Under the light, I saw how different her face was. One side was frozen, with her eyelid drooping, and the corner of her mouth pulled down. The size of her lips only made the unevenness worse. She kept dabbing away a little saliva with a handkerchief. "It was a stroke, Kevin," Amy began. "Carbon monoxide poisoning did it. I was lucky the maid came early or I would have died. One side of my body is weak, and my short-term memory's shot. It gets worse when I'm tired." "I'm sorry to hear that, Amy. How are you doing now?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Kevin, that's why I'm here. I need money." I nearly choked on my coffee, sputtering it onto the table. It took a few coughs to clear my throat before I could clean up the mess. "You've got to be kidding me. I'm sorry for your situation, but I'm barely getting by myself, and you know why." Amy avoided my gaze, looking down. "Besides," I continued, "didn't you have assets from your time with Troy? Last time I saw you, you were decked out in more jewelry than a rapper." Amy wiped the corner of her mouth again. "It's all gone, Kevin. Troy pawned everything trying to keep the creditors off him before the collapse. What little was left got seized by bankruptcy attorneys. After Troy's self-destruction, the cops turned the house into a crime scene. I just got back in last week and only managed to grab this gym bag of clothes." I stared at her, emotions I thought were buried threatening to surface. "What about social services or disability?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I applied, but most programs take 90 days to review, and they already told me my injuries don't qualify for full disability, so I won't get much help," Amy explained. "And none of Troy's old friends are willing to help you?" Amy let out a bitter laugh. "No, not anymore. None of them want me around. They're scared I'll hit on their husbands for money. Honestly, I can't blame them. After the divorce, I burned a lot of bridges, and most of our mutual friends sided with you." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "All right, Amy, sell the Camry. It's still worth something." "The Camry was never mine. Amy said, her voice shaking. Troy bought it for me, but the title was in King One Developer's name. The bank took it too. A surge of anger welled up. Amy, you got that car barely 4 months after we moved here. You started seeing Troy before the ink on the mortgage was even dry. Kevin, Amy turned away. Troy and I didn't get together until 6 months after I started working for him. I couldn't help myself. Oh, my mistake. I didn't mean to suggest your virtue was compromised by waiting an extra 2 months to jump into bed. Kevin, don't you think I know I messed up? This is hard for me too. I never wanted us to end up like this, Amy said, looking at my distant expression. Amy, do you really want to dive into this? Yeah, Kevin, why not? I waved my hand. They say that truth sets you free. Go ahead, try. It's not about trying, Kevin. I just want you to know that none of this was your fault. It was all me. I got swept up in it. You didn't do anything wrong. At first, it was great. When I started at King One Developers, I was treated like royalty. Troy always picked up the tab. For once, I didn't have to worry about prices or counting change. He gave me attention, and suddenly I was surrounded by important people. They made me feel like I was somebody. You were somebody, Amy. You were my wife, my partner since we were kids. Wasn't that enough? I see that now, Kevin. I just wish I'd realized it then. It all started when you left for that 3-day charter flight. Troy invited me to a political fundraising dinner, $2,500 a plate. My meal alone could have covered 2 months of our mortgage. Did you get chicken or fish? I asked, smirking. Kevin, stop. I'm being serious, Amy sighed. Troy had been sweet for weeks, but this was different. He bought me a $2,000 evening gown, and he didn't even flinch at the price. Everyone thought I was his girlfriend and treated me like a VIP. We sat with a former vice president. I got swept up in the glamour, the power. I felt like I was on top of the world. By the end of the night, we ended up in the parking lot, having fun in his Hummer. The valet must have gotten quite a tip, I said sarcastically. Kevin, please, it wasn't like that. What do you call it, Amy? Classy? Having fun in a parking lot sounds more like something you'd see on a street corner. Did you crack open the moonroof to make it more romantic? Amy blushed, but pressed on. I felt so guilty the next day, terrified you'd find out. When you came home, I stuck to you like glue to make up for what happened with Troy. Wow, Amy. And here I thought you were just showing gratitude to all the plumbers. Kevin, I promised it wouldn't happen again. I swore I'd be the best wife. But Troy kept apologizing, saying we'd had too much to drink, that it was a mistake. He didn't want to lose me as an employee over one slip-up. He was so smooth, and I fell for it. A week later, I went with him and some other executives to the coast for a big project. He chartered a private jet. It was so exciting. On the way back, Troy landed a multi-million-dollar deal. There was celebrating, drinks, hugs, and then we ended up in the plane's bathroom. I couldn't help myself. Amy, I see all that glamour really weakened your resolve, I said coldly. Kevin, I'm not proud of what I did. I'm not making excuses. I'm just telling you how it happened. After that trip, I gave in and enjoyed the lifestyle. Gambling, fine dining, jewelry. At first, only when you were away. But then it became lunches and midday rendezvous. Eventually, I started resenting you, feeling like our life wasn't enough. That's when I realized I'd put our marriage at risk. The saddest part is, it wasn't even Troy's money. It was King One Developers' corporate funds. Troy didn't have any real money of his own. Most of his paycheck went to his ex-wives. Even his Hummer was leased. The house, the Rolex, almost everything was in the company's name. Amy looked at me. So that's my sad, pathetic story, Kevin. Do you have any questions? Just one or two, Amy. I folded my hands on the table. If you had the life you wanted, why didn't you divorce me right away? Why drag it out for 1.5 years, cheating in secret? What was so thrilling about balancing life between Prince Troy's wealth and your pauper husband? Amy looked away. Kevin, at first, it was because I didn't want to hurt you. We've been together since elementary school. You were my best friend. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that it would end soon. You'd never find out, and we'd still live happily ever after. But it became harder to let go. All these new things made me feel like royalty. For the first time, I wasn't standing outside, looking in. I kept delaying ending things with Troy. I was like a fly drowning in honey. She wiped the saliva from the corner of her mouth again. When you found me in Troy's bedroom, I panicked. I knew there was no going back, that you'd never forgive me. But at that point, half a life with Troy seemed better than nothing. How about choosing the truth, Amy? I said sarcastically. We might have worked things out if you'd come to me after the first time. Kevin, believe it or not, I was planning to end it in 2 days. Even if you hadn't caught us, I was going to quit my job and leave Troy. That Friday, cold turkey, I was ready to dedicate myself to you, to our marriage. I'd already printed and signed my resignation letter. It was sitting in my desk drawer. Nice try, Amy. Makes me regret barging in on you and Troy. 2 more days and none of this would have happened. I was such a fool, I said, my voice dripping with irony. Let me guess, you don't have that letter with you, do you? No, Kevin, I can't prove it, but it's true. After I moved in with Troy, I got bored. Everything revolved around him. I started having more fun on my own. All right, Amy, here's a classic question. Was Troy better in bed than me? I watched her hesitate, searching for an answer. If I wanted someone to lie to me, I'd pay for it. So don't lie. Just tell me the truth. Amy sighed. Kevin, you were my first. And before Troy, you were the only one. We were always good together. But Troy, well, he was older and more experienced. He had been with a lot of women. Over time, I felt indebted to him for everything he gave me. So, payment for services rendered? I asked. I wasn't a promiscuous or anything, if that's what you're implying, Amy said, trying to smile. What do you call someone who exchanges favors for goods or services? I asked. That was different, she replied stiffly. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I said. Whatever, Kevin, but no, we never did it in our house or our bed, Amy exclaimed. Never? Not even once? I pressed. No, Kevin. Troy wanted to, but for me, it wasn't about the affair or even Troy or you. It was about the lifestyle. For the first time, I was living first class. I thought I was rising above everything. Amy glanced around the room. I didn't want to go back to this, I continued. So Troy didn't mind sharing you for 1.5 years while you were cheating on me. Was he as generous with others after you moved in? Troy was very possessive, Kevin. He wanted me to cut you off after we started, but I ignored him. I never had a relationship with both of you on the same day. Troy loved parading me around, but hated it when I talked to other men. The irony is, he had women all over the place, girlfriends, escorts. When he traveled, he'd invite call girls. But when it came to other women, he liked it to be just us. Once I gave in with his second wife. They were still on good terms. But I didn't enjoy it. She was like a caricature. A trophy wife, bleach blonde and empty-headed. I couldn't resist. So, what exactly was the difference between you two? Touch? Feel? Amy wrinkled her nose. As sad as it sounds back then, I thought she had it all. The money, the looks, the front row seat to everything I wanted. I used to laugh at people like that. Then I became one of them. Plastic and hollow. I smirked. Did I pay for all of Barbie's makeup or did Troy cover the silicone? Amy wrinkled her nose again. Kevin, it wasn't your money. Troy hid the surgery costs in some project budget. I'm sure the auditors will want it back. You've always been a good negotiator, Amy. Maybe you can use some of those bedroom tricks Troy taught you to settle with them. Kevin, I can't live like this anymore. I just want to disappear. I shook my head. Amy, if you want to go out like Troy did, I can't help you. I have a garage, but no car. Sorry. I shouldn't have kept making cheap jokes about Amy. It felt like kicking someone when they were down, but I couldn't stop. Deep anger kept bubbling up. I thought I was over her, but was I? They say love and hate are 2 sides of the same coin. I couldn't sort out what I was feeling, whether it was disgust at the person Amy had become or anger at what she had done to me, to us, to our relationship. Kevin, Amy said, I know a lot has happened, but before all this, we were always there for each other. I really need you now. We've been together most of our lives, and we've both grown and changed. Can't we try to keep what we had? I stood up. Amy, I'd rather chew tinfoil and shave my head with a cheese grater. I finished my now cold coffee and added, I don't know who you are anymore, and I just don't trust you. How do I know you haven't stashed away a bunch of money or jewelry? Maybe you're just waiting for everything to blow over so you can laugh at me again and leave me with nothing. Amy slumped in her chair, her hope fading. I'll never leave you again. Please, I need your help. I'm sorry, Amy. I can't take that risk anymore. It's too much. Can't or won't? She asked quietly. What's the difference? I replied. Just then, the door opened and Lourdes walked in. She was wearing her nursing uniform, floral and practical, just back from her afternoon shift. Oh, hi, Lourdes said, taking in the scene. She walked over to Amy, leaned slightly, and extended her hand. I'm Lourdes. And you are? With some effort, Amy raised her hand to shake. I'm Amy. Lourdes froze for a second, then recovered, eyeing Amy's cane, limp arm, and the look of her face. "Bell's palsy?" Lords asked, pointing to Amy's face. "I beg your pardon?" Amy replied. "Bell's palsy," Lords said professionally. "It damages the nerve that controls the facial muscles, causing paralysis, common with herpes." "I don't have herpes," Amy snapped, then softened. "But I can see why you'd think that after what I did to Kevin. I had a stroke." Amy went on to tell Lords the full story. When she finished, Lords asked to speak to me in the kitchen. "Kevin," Lords began, "we can't just throw Amy out on the street." "Okay," I said. "I'll call one of Jose's sons. They can drop Amy off at the shelter." Lords squeezed my hand so hard I felt her nails. "Kevin, you can't be serious. You can't leave someone like her in a place like that. They'd tear her apart." "What do you expect me to do, Lords? Invite her into our bed? The three of us?" "You heard me. It wouldn't be Amy's first time with another woman. Or maybe that's your plan." I raised an eyebrow and shot her a mocking look. Lords let go of my hand and waved me off. "You men are all the same. Put your fantasies away." "More like a nightmare," I said. "Losing you to Amy would have me sucking on a tailpipe." "Whatever," Lords rolled her eyes. "Amy can sleep on the couch tonight. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." "So, who's this Lords now? The Latin version of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer?" I asked. I noticed how Lords had jabbed Amy earlier with the herpes remark. Lords lowered her gaze. "Yeah, I shouldn't have said that. It was nasty kicking someone when they're already down." She sighed. "Then I remembered. You WJD. It's just one night." "You better count the silverware when you wake up," I muttered. "Kevin, we don't have any silverware worth stealing," Lords replied. "Doesn't it bother you that my ex-wife, with her reputation, is going to sleep in this house?" I asked. Lords looked at me seriously for a moment. "I know you, and more importantly, I trust you. Besides, if you leave me for plastic and trout lips, you were never mine to begin with." "Lords, that's never going to happen. You're stuck with me," I said, kissing her. The next morning at 6 a.m., I was in the kitchen dressed in my maintenance jumpsuit. I wasn't flying that day, but had 3 houses to clean for Jose Maria's wife's company. "Good morning, Kevin." Amy stood in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Her hair was tied back, and after a night on the couch, she looked worn out. I only hummed in response, turning my attention to my cup of coffee. "Kevin, do you still have our boxes of cards?" Amy asked, yawning. "Those were your cards, Amy." "No, I don't have your postcards anymore." "Where are they?" she pressed. "I burned them, Amy. Roasted marshmallows over them, actually. Sort of like watching our past go up in flames." "Oh," Amy said, looking unhappy. We sat in awkward silence for a while. "Kevin, I just want to thank you for letting me stay the night," Amy finally said. "Don't thank me, Amy. I wasn't thrilled about it." "Thank Lords," I replied. "Yes, Lords," Amy paused. "You and her." I didn't answer. My relationship with Lords wasn't any of Amy's business. "Kevin," Amy started, wiping saliva from her cracked lip. "I don't know if I said this last night, but I'm sorry." "Sorry for what, Amy?" "Cheating, leaving, taking all the money, ruining our marriage, lying, trying to take more after bankrupting me, coming back to mess up my life, or just missing all the toys Troy gave you." I stared at her, my voice cold. "Be specific." "I'm sorry I wanted something more than you did," Amy said softly. "That sounds more like regret than an apology," I said, standing up and pouring the rest of my coffee into the sink. "Tell me, Amy, if the House of Cards hadn't fallen and you still had everything from the last 3 years, would you still be here?" "Kevin, I'm sorry I left you," I heard her say as I rinsed out my cup. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around. Amy was standing close to me. "I see someone's happy I stayed the night," she said with a hopeful smile. "Don't flatter yourself, Amy," I said, brushing her off. Her smile faded, but she persisted. "Kevin, I meant what I said last night. I'm yours, only yours. You can have me anytime, anywhere." She held out her hand, waiting for me to take it. I looked at her hand, feeling nothing but a dull ache. "I've seen this show before, Amy. I'll pass." I turned away, heading for the door. Later that day, I realized my first major fight with Lords would be over Amy. I just wanted her out of my life to be someone else's problem. But Lords and Maria both lashed out at me. Jose Maria's husband wisely stayed out of sight, avoiding the crossfire. I wished I could have done the same. All their talk about Christian charity, forgiveness, and turning the other cheek sounded great in theory, but in practice, it sucked. 2 Catholic Latina women who believe God is on their side are an unstoppable force. They were firm in their belief that it was our duty to help those in need if we could. Cast your bread upon the waters and all that. They argued that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting what Amy had done. Lourdes and Maria pointed out that saints had forgiven those who wronged them. Even Jesus forgave Judas for the ultimate betrayal. I'm no saint, I replied, and any resemblance between me and Jesus is purely coincidental. Amy and Maria weren't discouraged. They insisted that since I had once loved Amy enough to marry her, her past loyalty to me, no matter how things ended, meant I should help her now. Good grief, I'd rather deal with a couple of rabid badgers than those two. Lourdes dismissed Amy's recent attempt to seduce me, calling it post-traumatic stress from the sudden collapse of her world. She said it was Amy's way of trying to reconnect with a safer past. Lourdes was better than me. I couldn't buy into that excuse. Eventually, Maria found Amy a job cleaning houses, a far cry from her old glamorous life. The best place we could put Amy was in the mother-in-law apartment above my garage, which Lourdes arranged. Amy paid a small rent, which helped a little. Lourdes and Amy sometimes sat together on the porch and talked. I avoided Amy whenever possible. Who wants to relive a train wreck? Lourdes said Amy kept to herself, worked, went to church, and rarely left the apartment. I had some choice words for where I wanted to send Amy, but I kept them to myself, only muttering them under my breath a few times. In all honesty, Amy never tried to pull any stunts or hit on me again. After a few months, things finally calmed down. One evening, as I returned home from my flights, I saw Lourdes on the porch talking to an older woman with silver hair. She looked vaguely familiar. I extended my hand to introduce myself, but the woman hugged me tightly. "Kevin, you remember Mrs. Talon?" Lourdes said, gesturing toward her. And then it hit me. She was the wife of the man who had the heart attack on the golf course that day. The man we'd saved. Now I had a name and a face to match the memory. I let her go to get help while Jose and I performed CPR on her husband. Come on, Mrs. Talon exclaimed, pulling me into the house. "He's been waiting for you all day, and he's as cranky as an old bear." "Who's waiting for me?" I asked, as we entered the dining room. Sitting at my table, surrounded by a pile of official-looking papers, was the man we'd rescued from the golf course. He had silver hair like his wife, was medium build and height, but exuded authority. A cane rested on the chair beside him. "Damn, boy, get over here," the silver-haired man barked. "I'm Boone Talon, and I've been waiting to meet you for a long time." He raised his cane and tapped the chair beside him. "Sit your lucky ass down right here." Boone Talon was a man who expected things to go his way. Feeling slightly intimidated, I sat next to him. He slapped me on the back so hard I almost toppled out of my chair. "Damn, boy, mind if I call you Kevin?" he said without waiting for a response. "I owe you my life. Boone Talon always pays his debts." He tossed a piece of paper into my lap. "Listen up, Kevin. This is a personal services contract. I've got a Learjet 60, and you're going to be one of my personal pilots once you get your certification on it. The contract's for 15 years, with annual raises and bonuses. It renews every year. Whether I live or die, you're set. Just don't crash the damn plane. If you do, you're dead anyway, so no worries about getting paid. Doc says I can't fly anymore, but I need to stay airborne. The Lear stays here. I'll page you. Got it?" I glanced at the paycheck amount on the contract, and my eyes nearly bulged out. It was ridiculous money, like winning the lottery. "Mr. Talon, this is very generous, but what?" Boone cut me off, his voice rough. "You think my life's not worth a few bucks? Hell, the insurance company should pay you for saving my skin. You kept them from having to cough up my life insurance payout." I was speechless, but Boone wasn't done. "Next," he said, sliding another stack of papers my way. "Here's the deed to this house, fully paid for. Consider it a signing bonus. I can't have my pilots worrying about mortgages when they're flying me around. I need them focused." He paused, then added, "And there's the title for a new F-250 Power Stroke pickup. You can pick it up at the dealer tomorrow. I don't want you standing at some damn bus stop, got it?" Boone tapped his cane and said, "That $1.4 million from Nine Rivers, forget it. My lawyers are handling it. You'll get an apology and a full membership by the end of the week." He then turned to Lourdes. "We need to get you a nursing license. I've got tutors lined up, and you'll pass the test in 90 days. After that, you'll work at All Saints Hospital in pediatrics and cardiology. In a year, you'll be my flying nurse, and your student loans are fully paid." Lourdes, shocked, hugged Boone, who chuckled. "Careful, you'll set off my pacemaker." I thanked Boone, but mentioned Jose. Boone grinned. "Jose's covered. He's getting certified on the Lear 65 with a raise. I also paid off his kids' tuition, housing, and loans." Before leaving, Boone added, "Now you two need to get married. I don't like my employees living in sin." Lourdes and I did get married, though it became a big event at Nine Rivers, organized by Maria and the Latina women, with Boone footing the bill, including a cruise as a wedding gift. Amy was there too. She was doing better, but still needed a cane and had some memory problems. She rented the apartment above our garage, and though I was polite, I kept my distance. She started seeing someone from her church, and I wished them well. My new job brought together my two loves, Lourdes and flying. Lourdes sent postcards to Amy from every place we visited, and they'd sit on the porch discussing the details. That would soon change, though. Lourdes had to stop flying for a while because we were expecting a baby. Soon, I'd have 3 loves. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business. My dad ran the local hardware store, and my mom kept our home warm and welcoming. I had an older sister who, despite occasional sibling rivalry, always looked out for me. Life was simple, filled with helping at the store or playing sports with friends. My parents emphasized hard work and honesty, and my life was mostly straightforward. Things changed during my teenage years when I attended a prestigious all-boys private school, thanks to my parents' belief in education. It was there that I first encountered social class differences. The wealthy kids often reminded me of my lower middle-class background, leading to frequent verbal and physical fights. Despite the odds, I managed to hold my own. During this time, I met Greg Sands, a boxer who would become my best friend and change my life. Why do people do what they do? It's a question I often ponder, especially regarding those I love. My wife is unfaithful, though she thinks I'm unaware. The truth is, I've known for a while. My upbringing was normal, loving parents and an older sister. My parents valued education, so I ended up at a strict all-boys private school that prioritized football, religion, and academics. Being middle class among wealthy students was tough, and I never fit in. Snobby rich kids targeted me, and I frequently got into fights. To channel my frustrations, I joined a boxing class at the Police Boys Club. This decision changed my life. I met kids like me and, more importantly, Greg Sands. Greg, a talented boxer and the son of a cop, quickly became my best friend. After an initial knockout in the ring, we became inseparable. Greg also attended my school, thanks to his dad's connections, and together, we handled the bullies. One day, a bully insulted my family and I snapped, breaking his nose and knocking out some teeth. Greg, always loyal, had my back and took care of the other bullies. While Greg was kind to his friends, he was ruthless to his enemies. We quickly dealt with a few more reinforcements and thought nothing of it. They had done this to me before, and I usually tried to plot revenge, though it rarely worked. However, making rich enemies was a mistake. Douglas's father, a powerful businessman, was furious. He got Sandman and me suspended for the rest of the year, even though only a month of classes remained. He also had us charged with attack. Luckily, witnesses from the girls' school backed our story, confirming that Douglas started it. Sandman's dad, the deputy chief, also helped. While the attack charges were dropped, the suspension stuck, and Douglas's father even tried to make my parents pay for his son's surgery. I spent the summer working at my dad's hardware store, staying out of trouble. Sandman and I hung out, hit the gym, and ran together. He even tried to hit on my older sister, but she was headed to college and wasn't interested. Life stayed pretty much the same throughout school. Douglas Peterson vowed revenge, but I knew it wouldn't be physical since he'd met his match. Sandman became the heavyweight state champ, and I did well too, placing in the top 10. Sandman thought about turning pro, but didn't want to end up like his bitter uncle, who was broken from boxing. In our final year, we started dating girls from the neighboring school, and with our cars, we spent a lot of time cruising around. I lost my pureness to Susan Bates, but it wasn't love, just good times. Meanwhile, Douglas never forgave me for humiliating him. He had everything: money, looks, power, but he was only happy when hurting someone. He sought revenge by dating Susan, thinking I loved her, but I wasn't too bothered. Sandman and I eventually decided the Army was the best option since my family couldn't afford college. We enlisted together, missing prom due to basic training, which didn't bother us. I quickly realized the Army wasn't for me beyond my initial commitment, but Sandman thrived in uniform and aimed for special forces. After basic training, I returned home before starting officer training. Sandman teased me, but I knew I could handle it and eventually earn a business degree. This marked the first time in years we'd be apart, and I didn't realize it would be many years before I saw him again. Officer training went smoothly, and I graduated as Second Lieutenant Roger Easton. The business degree required more Army time, extending my commitment by 3 years. I was assigned to the Army History Unit, which meant office work, but I enjoyed learning about Army traditions and history, thanks to a great sergeant. I hadn't heard from Sandman in a while as he was deployed in dangerous areas. I worried, but knew he was well trained. Meanwhile, I found stability in my routine, studying for my degree and boxing when I could. The only thing missing was a good woman. Though I dated and had flings, I hadn't found someone I connected with, until everything changed. I returned to my hometown for a music festival weekend, planning to visit my parents, Sandman's folks, and catch up with friends over some beers. On Friday night, I got the latest updates. My dad was thinking about selling the hardware store and retiring, and Sandman's dad had become the police chief, though they hadn't heard from Sandman due to the secretive nature of his work. Saturday morning, after my run and breakfast, I helped my dad open the store. That's when I ran into Susan Bates, now Susan Peterson, who was in town for the festival with her cousin, Kelly. Susan mentioned Doug was overseas on business, and she introduced me to Kelly, who was stunning. We agreed to meet up at the festival later. My dad teased me about Susan being on the prowl despite her marriage, but I only had eyes for Kelly. After catching up with friends, I headed to the festival, where I found Susan, drunk and flirting with everyone, while Kelly looked uncomfortable. I joined them, bought drinks and food, and endured Susan's endless chatter about her life. She married Doug right after graduation, but it was likely a rifle wedding due to a pregnancy that ended in a mishap. Doug now managed international business for his father's company. Eventually, Susan left with Peter Morrison to check out his car, and Kelly, relieved, joked about her cousin's departure. We spent the rest of the evening getting to know each other, finding we had much in common. Kelly worked as a human resources manager at Peterson Corporation thanks to Susan's help. We ended the night exchanging numbers and planned a date for the following week. Things moved quickly between us, and after nearly 2 years of dating, we were very close. Kelly was traditional and wanted to wait until marriage for Zex, which was frustrating but allowed us to grow closer emotionally. Despite the occasional presence of Susan and the lingering shadow of Doug, we made it work. Kelly's parents, though wealthier, accepted me, especially since her father, a retired general, and I found common ground through the military. After completing my degree, I proposed to Kelly, and she accepted. Her father gave his blessing, though her mother, less thrilled, insisted on a prenuptial agreement, likely influenced by Doug. The wedding went smoothly, though Sandman couldn't attend. His younger brother stepped in as my best man, and thankfully, Doug was overseas. It was a wonderful day, and even better, Kelly and I discovered we were just as compatible in bed as out. Life moved on as expected. We bought a nice house in a good neighborhood and started planning for the future. We both wanted kids, but first I had to decide between staying in the Army or switching to civilian life. We agreed I should use my degree, so I began looking for a new career. I got lucky and landed a job at a major bank overseeing internal and external security. The pay was double what I made in the Army, so I left the military. We immediately started trying for kids, but nothing happened. After a doctor's visit, I found out I was sterile. I planned to break the news to Kelly during a surprise cruise, but things changed when she announced she'd been promoted and would be traveling with Doug Peterson, now her boss, on a business trip. I had a bad feeling, but couldn't say much. Kelly assured me Doug had changed and was all business. The morning she left, Doug arrived in a limo with a grin, and they drove off. I spent the next few days sulking. Kelly called, saying everything was fine. Then, on Saturday morning, there was a knock at the door. It was Sandman. He looked tougher and more world-weary, but that's what war does. We hugged, grabbed beers, and caught up. Sandman had left the Army after 10 years, tired of the liquidating. I updated him on my life, including the connection to Doug, and we laughed about Susan marrying him. As we talked, Sandman recognized General Bates, Kelly's father, from my wedding photos. He revealed that General Bates had been his commander in Special Forces and hinted at Mrs. Bates's affairs with officers, explaining that this led to the general's retirement to avoid scandal. This revelation left me questioning the family I had married into. I invited Sandman to stay the night, but he had to leave. Before going, he mentioned he was starting police academy training on Monday. He promised to visit again when Kelly returned. As I mulled over everything, I couldn't help but worry about Doug and Kelly, especially given the new information about her family. The next week flew by with work keeping me busy. Kelly called a few times, and by Friday night, she was home. She seemed like her usual self, and we spent the night reconnecting. The next day, I told Kelly about Sandman's return and arranged for them to meet. When Sandman arrived with flowers and wine, I was about to introduce him to Kelly when suddenly, "Oh my God, Greg, you're Sandman," Kelly exclaimed. "Hi, Kelly. Good to see you," Sandman replied. I was shocked. Turns out Kelly knew Sandman from the army base when her dad was in charge. They caught up for hours, and I felt like a third wheel. While cooking dinner, I overheard something like, "Does he know?" When I asked what they meant, they both looked awkward. Sandman left, saying Kelly and I needed to talk. Kelly explained that she and Sandman had dated on the base with her dad's approval, but broke up when Sandman went to Iraq. She assured me it was all in the past. But I realized Sandman still had feelings for her, which explained why he avoided our wedding. I asked Kelly if this would be a problem, and she said no, that she loved only me. Still, I was upset neither of them had mentioned it earlier. When I called Sandman, he apologized, saying he didn't want to stir up old issues. I accepted his explanation. Life continued, with Kelly busier than ever in her new job, and kids took a back seat, so I didn't bring up my sterility. Sandman became a cop and joined the pill squad. But at home, things started to change. Our sex life dwindled as Kelly worked late and traveled with Doug more often. I began to suspect something was wrong. Needing time to think, I decided to help my dad close his store as he retired. Kelly supported the idea, saying she'd be busy with work all week anyway. At the store, Dad surprised me by suggesting I protect myself, hinting at rumors that Kelly was behaving like her cousin Susan. He gently told me that Doug was bragging about sleeping with Kelly 3 times a week. I was furious. It's one thing to suspect, but hearing it confirmed hit hard. I realized I'd been a fool. I decided to confront Susan Peterson directly. Hearing she was at her parents' estate, I drove over. When I arrived, I asked Susan bluntly, "Is Doug sleeping with my wife?" She looked shocked and replied, "You don't mess around, Roger." "Well, it's all over town," I said. Susan broke down in tears and explained she had left Doug and was now back living at home, with divorce on the horizon. She revealed they were forced into marriage and resented each other from the start. Doug openly cheated, even keeping an apartment near his office for his affairs. In response, Susan began having her own affairs out of spite. Things came to a head when Doug admitted he was involved with Kelly and that it was only a matter of time before she moved in. That was Susan's breaking point, and she left. We talked more, but I was beyond sympathy. Susan vowed to make Doug pay, but I wanted my own revenge. I wished her well, hoping it would be the last time we spoke. When I got home, my parents were out, and Kelly had left a note saying she needed to talk urgently. Ignoring her calls, I grabbed a beer and sat on the deck. My parents returned later, and after a few more beers, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke to the smell of breakfast and had a quiet meal with my folks before heading to the store for the final handover. After lunch, Dad and I went fishing, and he agreed I should confront the situation directly. When we got back, Kelly's BMW was in the driveway. Inside, she was sitting with tissues, having talked to my mom. My parents quickly left, giving us space. Kelly broke down, explaining that Susan had called to say she was divorcing Doug, and mentioned I knew about Doug's so-called late meetings. Panicked, Kelly had driven straight to my parents' house to talk. Through tears, Kelly insisted she wasn't having an affair with Doug. She claimed the late meetings were legitimate, and that Susan had started the rumors to break us up. Kelly also said she would stop attending late meetings with Doug. Her story seemed rehearsed, and I didn't buy it. I knew Susan didn't love me, Doug hated me, and the Bates women had a reputation for cheating. I realized Kelly was now the enemy, but I needed evidence before confronting her. I pretended to forgive her, putting on a convincing act. We went out to dinner, and she left the next morning, happy and unaware of my suspicions. Once she was gone, I called Sandman to help with surveillance on Kelly. I also asked my dad to tell Kelly I was staying until Sunday, buying time to gather more information. After packing my car, I said goodbye and headed back to the city. Sandman still hadn't returned my call, but I didn't worry about it. I checked into a hotel far enough from anyone Kelly or I knew, then went to work to greet my boss and request another week off, which he approved. While there, I opened a new bank account in my name and transferred half of our joint savings, ensuring my future paychecks would go into it. Feeling more secure, I returned to the hotel and tried calling Sandman again. Still no answer. I headed to the bar for a beer and chatted with the bartender until my dad called to check in. After a few beers, I decided to call it a day, paid my tab, and went back to my room to shower and change. Just as I was leaving for a late lunch, Sandman finally called back. He apologized for the delay, explaining he'd just been promoted to detective. We agreed to meet at a local bar. At the bar, which turned out to be a cop hangout, we found a booth and ordered beers. I told Sandman everything. The rumors about Kelly and Doug, the late meetings, and Kelly's changed behavior. Sandman listened and then jokingly asked if I wanted Doug kneecapped. We laughed but then got serious. We needed evidence of the affair, and Sandman promised to handle it, using his connections. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover but followed Sandman's advice to act normal. I canceled my leave and told Kelly I'd be home that night. She welcomed me warmly, and over dinner she suggested starting a family. I knew it was pointless given my condition, but I said nothing. As weeks passed, I grew anxious waiting for Sandman's update. Kelly questioned our joint account balance, and I made up a story about lending Dad money, which satisfied her. Finally, in early December, Sandman called with news, and we met again at the same bar. He handed me an envelope saying it was good news. The private investigator's report cleared Kelly. She had been faithful, just living her routine life. Doug, on the other hand, was a mess, involved with multiple women, gambling, and pills. Sandman revealed that Doug was about to be busted for cocaine, and his downfall would make headlines. It was the perfect Christmas gift. I bought a round for the bar, then headed home to my wife. Sandman promised to visit over the weekend. When I got home, Kelly was all over me, and we had intense, passionate sex. Afterwards, she surprised me by saying, "You're going to be a father." I was shocked, but Kelly mistook my reaction for excitement. She happily shared her pregnancy news, explaining she wanted to wait until after the first trimester to tell me. She then started talking about the nursery, baby shower, and maternity leave. But I zoned out. The realization that I was being deceived hit hard. As a logical person, I quickly concluded that the baby couldn't be mine because I was sterile. I knew Kelly had to go, but I needed to play it smart. I couldn't believe Kelly thought she could pass off the baby as mine, given our near non-existent sex life. I tossed and turned, watching her sleep peacefully, anger boiling inside me. Unable to stay in bed, I went downstairs to my study. I even considered using my weapon, but decided against it. I knew I needed a plan. I realized my life was built on lies. I concluded that the baby wasn't mine. Kelly was a cheater, Sandman had betrayed me, and Doug was just a pawn. Feeling surrounded by enemies, I knew I had to pretend everything was normal while planning my next move. My first step was to reach out to Doug Peterson. The next morning, I left early, made a call to Doug's office, and left an urgent message. By mid-morning, it was clear he wasn't going to call back. I didn't want to risk going to his office and being seen by Kelly or her colleagues, so I decided to follow him instead. I rented an SUV and waited outside his office. When Doug left, I discreetly followed him to an apartment building. Seizing the moment, I pulled up, grabbed him, and drove off. Doug was terrified, thinking I was going to eliminate him, but I assured him I just wanted to talk. We drove to a secluded spot by a lake where I handed him the report Sandman had compiled. As Doug read it, he muttered that it was all lies, blaming Susan. I told him the report was from Greg Sands, not Susan. Doug realized he was in deeper trouble than he thought. Doug turned even paler, convinced I was going to eliminate him. Instead, I surprised him by saying I didn't believe most of the report, except that he likely cheated on his wife. I then stunned him further by saying we needed to help each other. Doug, a weak figurehead controlled by his father, wasn't the playboy the report claimed, but he was still vulnerable. I told Doug that he needed to leave town immediately because Sandman was planning to frame him with pills and get him arrested. Doug was bewildered, asking why I was helping him and why Sandman was targeting him. I explained that I needed his father's connections to dig into Sandman's background. Doug called his father, arranged to leave the country, and handed me the phone. Reluctantly, Mr. Peterson Sr. agreed to provide a full report on Sandman within a few days. As for why Sandman was doing this, I couldn't give Doug a clear answer. I suspected it was Sandman's twisted way of revenge. I waited with Doug until his father's people arrived to take him away, knowing this would delay Sandman's plans and buy me time to figure things out. I returned to the city, dropped off the rental, and decided to lay low. Needing a break from everything, I accepted an assignment from work that sent me on a 2-week trip to regional offices. Kelly wasn't thrilled about my sudden departure, but I reminded her that I needed to keep my boss happy with the baby on the way, which quieted her. The 2 weeks passed quickly, but I had trouble reaching Mr. Peterson Sr. for the report. On my last day, a courier delivered a thick package, the report on Greg Sands. I spent half the night reading it, pausing several times for straight whiskey as the details unsettled me. The Greg Sands I knew at 18 had turned into a twisted individual by 28. The report revealed his violent childhood, including witnessing his mother's homicide. His stepmother and father tried to manage his rage by enrolling him in boxing, which led to his success as a champion. But the man he had become was far more dangerous than I had imagined. The report answered all my questions but provided no comfort. I realized I was just collateral damage in a long-standing power struggle. Worse, if Sandman discovered I knew the truth, he would likely eliminate me. There wasn't much of interest until Greg Sands joined the Army. That's when everything became clear, and I realized I needed to distance myself. I knew about our basic training, but the real revelations came after Sandman completed Special Forces training. The key figure was General Edward Bates, who led Sandman's unit. They clashed constantly. Bates was ruthless, while Sandman valued righteousness and his men. Their biggest conflict? Sandman's relationship with Bates's daughter, Kelly. Initially, Sandman got involved with Kelly to spite Bates, but it quickly became serious. Kelly resembled Sandman's late mother, which deepened his attachment. Things fell apart when Sandman proposed, and Kelly refused, saying she needed her father's approval. Shortly after, Bates sent Sandman's unit on dangerous missions, culminating in a disastrous operation that left many dead or injured, including Sandman. Bates retired in disgrace, and Kelly ended things with Sandman, following her father's wishes despite her love for him. Afterward, Sandman plotted revenge. When he learned I was marrying Kelly, he saw a new opportunity. He left the military, became a cop in my city, and planned to ruin Kelly's reputation by seducing her, getting her pregnant, and causing a scandal. His ultimate goal was to destroy Bates by using Peterson Sr.'s influence after framing Doug Peterson. But I derailed his plans by helping Doug escape. I knew Sandman would come after me once he realized what happened. My first move was to get Kelly out of town, hoping it would distract Sandman. Then I had to decide whether to stay and face him or leave before things escalated. When I returned home, it was too quiet. Our dog was gone and Kelly's clothes were missing. In the kitchen, I found a note from Kelly saying she had a business meeting and that our dog was with my parents. It seemed like an excuse, and I suspected she was with Sandman. To confirm, I called the police station and learned Sandman was on a 2-week vacation. Realizing I might be jumping to conclusions, I decided to call Peterson Sr. Surprisingly, he answered, "What do you want, trailer trash? You got the report, didn't you?" Peterson sneered. "Yeah, thanks," I replied, though it was a week late. He asked, "Why are you wasting my time?" "I'm trying to find my wife, Kelly Easton," I said. He laughed and asked, "How's your marriage going?" Then he added, "She's at a meeting with Brett White, the temporary CEO. I thanked him, but before hanging up, he couldn't resist a jab. No doubt White's giving her the bedroom tour. I realized Kelly had actually told the truth, but I still worried, where's Sandman? I got my answer the next morning. I woke up determined to end the charade. I'm divorcing Kelly and moving on. Let Sandman have the Bates clan. I'm done with this sick game. I knew I had loved Kelly, but her betrayal destroyed our future. Revenge was tempting, but my sanity mattered more. While I was deep in thought, Kelly called. I ignored it, not ready to hide my contempt. After a shower and coffee, I headed to work, where I made a lawyer appointment and cleared out our bank accounts. I wanted my assets liquid and on hand. At 10 a.m., my life took another turn. A courier delivered a package with familiar handwriting. Inside was a videotape and 2 notes. One read, "I know," written in what looked like blood. The second was a newspaper clipping. Peterson Corporation CEO found dead. Doug Peterson had been found dead on a beach, with police treating it as foul play. I didn't need to watch the tape. I knew it contained Doug's confession. My military instincts kicked in. I left the office, ignoring my secretary, and drove out of the city. I realized 3 things. Doug had confessed to Sandman. Sandman could find me anywhere, and he was going to eliminate me for ruining his plans. I drove to my old sergeant, Brian Moses, who had connections and could help me disappear. When I arrived, Brian was relaxing on the beach. I hated dragging him into this, but had no choice. "Lieutenant, what brings you here?" Brian asked. "I need your help, Brian. I need to disappear. No questions asked," I said. Understanding the seriousness, Brian made a call and took me downstairs for a quick photo session to create a new identity. We avoided the heavy topic and ate while waiting. An hour later, a guy arrived to handle the new identity. Brian put me up for the night, and as I tried to relax, my thoughts drifted to Kelly. Concerned for her safety, I made a call. She answered almost immediately. "Kelly, listen carefully. Get your things and leave the hotel immediately. Don't go home, to your parents or mine, I urged. Kelly laughed. Roger, what are you talking about? Are you drunk? No, Kelly, stay away from Sandman and run for your life, I warned. Why would I do that? She asked, confused. Kelly, I know everything, including that the baby is Sandman's. He's not who you think he is. You've been warned, I said firmly. Before she could respond, I hung up and smashed my phone to prevent any tracking. I worried for my parents, but believed Sandman was focused on me, Kelly, and the General. After a few drinks with Brian, I went to bed. The next morning, I paid $10,000 for a new identity, now Justin Green, with all the necessary documents. I left the ID materials with Brian, who promised to arrange a new vehicle for me. But first, I needed Roger Easton to die. Years ago, a soldier under my command told me about his small hometown hell. It had a corrupt police force, but few major crimes, perfect for my plan. That night, I visited a nearby town's morgue, easily bribing the night attendant to let me see the John Doe bodies. I found one that matched my size and shape. Another bribe ensured the attendant would forget me. He mentioned he'd be on duty Saturday night, which fit my plan perfectly. I arrived in hell and booked a motel for 4 nights, making sure the staff remembered my name. The next morning, I made myself known around town, meeting locals, including the mayor, and telling them I'd be staying for a few days. After breakfast, I found the ideal spot for my staged end of life, a notorious cliff just outside hell where many had driven off to their end of lives. Everything was falling into place. Next, I needed transport for Saturday night. After some searching, I found a dirt bike for sale on a small farm, bought it, and loaded it into my truck. Later, I stopped at the diner for a late lunch and met Sheriff Baxter. He seemed lazy and incompetent, confirming my decision to avoid his recommended bar. That night, I visited a busy but seedy local bar. I had some drinks, made jokes with the locals, and bought rounds for everyone, which quickly made me popular. This place would work perfectly for Saturday night. Afterward, I drove to the cliff outside town, hid my dirt bike, helmet, and clothes, and then returned to the motel to sleep. I woke up early Saturday, confident everything was set. After breakfast at the diner, where I chatted with the locals and left a generous tip, I returned to the motel to eliminate time by watching TV and reviewing my plan. Lunch at a local restaurant followed, with more small talk and another big tip. By early evening, it was time to head to the morgue. I parked behind the morgue, hoping the same attendant was on duty. As expected, he left soon after, likely to score pills or booze. I quickly picked the lock, retrieved the John Doe body, and confirmed there were no new security measures. With the body loaded in my truck, I drove to the cliff, hit it, and went back into town. At the motel, I showered, changed clothes, and left everything behind before heading to the bar. The place was packed, just as I hoped. The locals welcomed me, remembering the generous out-of-towner. I bought drinks, acted increasingly drunk, and started buying shots for everyone. I barely drank, discreetly leaving bottles behind, but everyone thought I was having a wild night. At one point, the bartender, concerned, suggested I give him my truck keys. Thinking quickly, I threw $500 on the bar, yelled, "Drinks for everyone," and slipped out as the crowd surged to the bar. I staggered to my truck, keeping up the act, and drove off, weaving until I was out of sight. I reached the cliff, parked, and retrieved the body from the bushes. Stripping off my clothes, I dressed the body in them, then soaked the truck and the body in whiskey. I opened the fuel tank, placed a fuel-soaked rag in it, and started the engine. As the truck rolled toward the edge, I lit the rag and watched it plunge down the cliff and explode. I hopped on my dirt bike and rode off, heading for my freedom. Early the next morning, I arrived at Brian Moses' beach house. Brian had bought me a knock-up truck and made an offer. I could hide out in a remote cabin his late father owned near a town called Last Chance. I agreed, feeling it was a fitting place to lay low. Before I left, Brian gave me a phone and warned, "Only use this to receive messages from me. If you get a emergency text, leave immediately." After grabbing my new ID and clothes, I hugged Brian and drove to the cabin. The directions were easy to follow, and I arrived by lunchtime. The cabin was isolated and perfect for hiding out. I settled in, determined to grow a beard and change my appearance before venturing into town. Brian had stocked enough supplies to last a month. My only thought now was, I hope everyone believes I'm dead. I began working out daily, using the trails for long-distance running to get back in shape. A week later, I received a text from Brian. "Roger Easton is dead. Funeral next week. We'll watch over your family." I felt guilty about the pain I was causing my family, but it was necessary for their safety. I didn't hear from Brian for the rest of the month. 3 weeks into my new life as Justin Green, I was satisfied with my progress. I'd lost weight and grown a decent beard, though I wanted another week before venturing into town. Finally, I decided to watch the video Sandman had sent. It was brutal. Doug Peterson had been tortured and confessed everything, including my involvement. The butcher, dressed in black and masked, was clearly Sandman. At the end of the video, Sandman threatened, "I'm coming to eliminate you, Roger, and destroy everything you hold dear." Watching the video enraged me. Sandman was no longer just a threat. He was a sick, deluded butcher who enjoyed his work. His ability to switch his rage on and off terrified me. I realized he wouldn't stop until he finished off his enemies, and my family could be next. I couldn't live in fear forever. Motivated by the video, I intensified my training, pushing myself to my limits. By week 5, I was ready to venture into town. I kept a low profile, bought supplies, and picked up a laptop with internet access. I also bought a 7mm semi-auto rifle, a 9mm SIG P228, and plenty of ammunition. At a pawn shop, I found an old boxing bag and gloves. On my way back to the cabin, I saw a sign for puppies. I stopped and bought a border collie puppy, Jess, to keep me company and serve as an early warning system. Back at the cabin, I settled in, set up my purchases, and fed Jess. Later, I searched online for news about Roger Easton. I found a local newspaper article titled, "Drunken Man Burns to End of Life Near Hell." It described how Roger Easton, a visitor well known to locals, had gotten drunk, driven off a cliff, and died in a fiery crash. Sheriff Baxter confirmed no suspicious circumstances. The only other mentions were about my funeral arrangements, indicating the plan had worked, at least temporarily. For the next 6 months, I lived in isolation, with Jess as my only companion. I ventured into town once a month, where people called me Grizzly Adams due to my beard and long hair. I trained hard, regained my Army fitness, and sharpened my shooting skills. Brian occasionally texted me, and I rarely used the internet. One July day, I checked my hometown's local paper and found troubling news. The Easton hardware store had burned down under suspicious circumstances 5 months earlier. Though the new owner had kept the name, I knew Sandman was behind it. It confirmed that he hadn't forgotten about the Easton family. What disturbed me most was a story about the tragic end of lives of a wealthy family. The article likened it to the Kennedy curse, starting with Susan Bates's end of life. She fell down the stairs in a drunken stupor and broke her neck. On the day of her funeral, her parents, along with General Bates and his wife, died in a car crash on the way to the service. This left Kelly Bates Easton as the sole heiress of the Bates fortune. The article mentioned Kelly was deeply traumatized, having recently lost her husband to self-destruction. I found that odd, since my end of life had only been reported as an accident. This new detail made me suspect Kelly was more involved in these events than I had initially thought. 2 other stories caught my eye. One was a wedding announcement. Kelly Bates Easton had married Greg Sands a month ago. The other was about Douglas Peterson Sr. suffering a heart attack and being airlifted to a city hospital. I wasn't sure if Sandman was involved, but I knew I had to stop hiding and take control. My first stop would be the hospital to see Peterson Sr., followed by a visit to Sandman. I packed quickly, grabbed my SIG P228 and my dog Jess, and hit the road. Jess, sensing my tension, was nervous on the drive. We arrived at Brian's beach house in the afternoon. He didn't recognize me at first, but Jess jumping all over him gave me away. "Lieutenant, nice look, Bigfoot," Brian laughed as we hugged. He invited me in for a beer, and after settling Jess with some water and snacks, I decided to tell Brian everything. I spent a couple of hours recounting the whole story, from my history with Sandman to Kelly's affair, her pregnancy, faking my end of life, and the recent end of lives of the Bates and Peterson families. I also showed him the reports and newspaper articles I had gathered, asking him to keep them safe in case anything happened to me. Brian was serious. "Lieutenant, Special Forces guys like Sandman aren't to be messed with. He's gone rogue." "I know, Brian, but I can't live in fear. I have to stop him," I replied. Brian offered to help, but I insisted he stay out of it, asking him instead to protect my family if things went wrong. After some convincing, he reluctantly agreed. Brian's biggest concern was whether I could actually eliminate Sandman. "If it's eliminate or be liquidated, I'll have to," I said, aware that I was up against a trained butcher with power and resources. I knew my chances were slim, but I had no choice. I had never considered liquidating anyone, but as the saying goes, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. I'd run long enough. It was time to face the music. Late at night, I headed back to the city where I had lived and worked for years. I arrived late, checked into a cheap hotel, and dropped off my gear. Then I texted Brian to let him know I was safe and planned to visit Peterson Sr. at the hospital. By the time I arrived, visiting hours were over, just as I wanted. My beard and long hair would help obscure my identity from many security cameras. I knew the hospital layout well, and had already confirmed Peterson Sr. was in room 319 on the third floor. I avoided security, slipped into the restroom, and waited until the coast was clear. I made my way to room 319, where I found Peterson Sr. pale and hooked up to monitors. I must have dozed off for about 15 minutes, only to be awakened by a nurse checking on him. After she left, I stepped out of the restroom quietly. Peterson Sr. startled me by speaking first. "Come closer. Let me see the face of my butcher, Mr. Sands," he said shakily. I turned on a small light, and he seemed surprised. "So Sands farms out his work now? What a gutless fool." "Get on with it," he sneered. "I'm not here to eliminate you, old man," I said. Recognizing my voice, he asked, "Easton, is that you?" He began to weep, but they were tears of relief, not pain. This was not the reaction I expected. Despite our past, Peterson Sr. seemed genuinely glad I was alive. We talked until morning, and I left the hospital with two valuable things: a key to a safety deposit box and crucial information. Back at the motel, I texted Brian and got some sleep. Waking up at 11 a.m., I showered, ate, and called the hospital. Peterson Sr. confirmed that I could access safe deposit box 112 under my new identity, Justin Green. Before heading to the bank, I stopped at a barbershop to shave my head and beard. I wasn't hiding anymore. Even with the change, you'd have to look twice to recognize me. I was leaner and more muscular. At the bank, I was treated like a VIP. After accessing the box, I took everything: a large envelope and a significant amount of money. I returned to the motel, grabbed some takeout, and sat down to think. My conversation with Peterson Sr. had been eye-opening. Since my end of life, things had escalated quickly for Greg Sands. With Doug and me out of the picture, the general had become Sandman's main target. After I called Kelly that night, she didn't run away. She ran straight into Sandman's arms. Rumor had it she was telling people that I had abandoned her when I died. Sandman and Kelly were thrilled to be together, though Sandman was frustrated he couldn't personally take me down. With me out of the way, only General Bates remained as a problem. Peterson Sr. assured me the report in the safety deposit box would explain everything. He was furious and grieving over his son's end of life, but even with all his money and power, he couldn't get to Sandman. He had started a reinvestigation into both Sandman and Kelly Bates. Kelly had quickly dropped the Easton name, and this time Peterson spared no expense. Initially, he planned to use me as a weapon against them, but then I died. Before his heart attack, Peterson Sr. had been planning to hire some shady characters to deal with Sandman. When I showed up, he decided to help me instead, believing my revenge-fueled determination could succeed where money couldn't. He called it bloodlust and had more confidence in me than I did. I took the key and promised to keep him informed. Sitting in front of the thick report, I started reading. Much of it was information I already knew, but it added details that made me realize how thoroughly I had been played. Peterson Sr. must have spent a fortune on it. Greg Sands and Kelly Bates were instantly attracted to each other years ago. The hatred between General Bates and Sandman was real, but contrary to earlier reports, Kelly hadn't refused to marry Sandman. Instead, they planned to elope, with Sandman leaving the army to become a cop. However, General Bates discovered the plan and had Sandman's unit deployed to the Middle East, hoping he'd be liquidated in action. When Kelly kept writing to Sandman, declaring her love, the general threatened to have him brought back in a body bag if she continued. In a rare act of selflessness, Kelly broke things off, fearing her father would make good on his threat. Heartbroken, Sandman hoped to reconnect with Kelly during R&R, but the general sent his unit into a deadly mission instead. Although Sandman survived, he was forever changed. After the general was forced to resign, Kelly never forgave him, and Sandman's rage resurfaced. Liquidating became his outlet, and his military training made him effective. As for me, I was just a pawn. Kelly, close to her cousin Susan, knew all about me through Sandman. She came to the festival with the intention of marrying me as a means to stay connected to Sandman. When the marriage lasted longer than she intended, she tried to push me away by denying closeness, hoping I'd leave. Her ultimate goal was for Sandman to return, become jealous, and reclaim her. Much of the report's information came from Susan Peterson, who, bitter over Doug's end of life, revealed everything Kelly had confided in her. Sandman returned to civilian life, seeking both Kelly and revenge on the general. When he found Kelly again, they resumed their relationship, and she became pregnant. Kelly then hinted at an affair with Doug Peterson to provoke me into either liquidating him or divorcing her. clearing the way for her and Sandman. When I approached Sandman for help, he saw an opportunity. He doctored the report on Kelly to keep me distracted, then planned to frame Doug for pill charges. Once that was done, Sandman intended to ally with Peterson Sr. by getting Doug off the charges and using him to destroy General Bates. The plan fell apart when Kelly told me she was pregnant because no one knew I was sterile. That confirmed her cheating, and I knew it had to be with Sandman since Doug's involvement was fake. I wanted quick revenge for both Sandman's lies and Kelly's betrayal. I realized Sandman was setting up Doug to push me into action, so I decided to protect Doug out of spite. At the time, I didn't realize how crucial Doug was to Kelly and Sandman's plan to eliminate me. When Doug vanished, Sandman was enraged and hunted him down. After torturing Doug, he discovered I had sabotaged his plan to get the general. In his fury, he sent me the video package, trying to provoke me into making a reckless move he could exploit. Complicating things, my call to warn Kelly inadvertently tipped off Sandman that I had left the city. She informed him, and he started searching for me. Only my quick thinking and Brian's help kept me and my family safe. When I faked my self-destruction, they were thrilled, and I became irrelevant, allowing Sandman to focus on the general. It seems Kelly and Sandman caught wind of people asking questions. They figured out Susan had talked and decided to eliminate her. Susan thought her money would protect her, but they saw an opportunity to remove her and the general without suspicion. They didn't care if Kelly's mother, aunt, and uncle died too. Susan went out for the evening, and when she returned, Sandman was waiting. He broke her neck, making it look like she had fallen down the stairs while drunk. Then they tampered with the general's car, ensuring it crashed on the way to Susan's funeral. Just like that, the Bates family was gone, and Kelly inherited everything: wealth and political connections. Sandman had taken out all his enemies except Peterson Sr. After a brief mourning period, Kelly and Sandman married. The only glitch was Kelly's mishap. Whether it was a natural loss or deliberate because they suspected the baby wasn't Sandman's, I don't know. Sandman likely planned to get rid of Peterson Sr. next, but the heart attack probably felt like a lucky break, as it could eliminate him off without their involvement. Reflecting on all this, I considered walking away. But then I thought about my mom, dad, and sister. If Sandman got bored, he might target the rest of the Easton family too. No, I decided. As my dad always said, when you've got a diseased dog, the most humane thing to do is put him down. I woke up the next morning wondering if it would be my last day. After a shower, I called Brian and updated him on my plan. I'm going to ambush Sandman at the Bates mansion. He and Kelly moved in right after her uncle and aunt died, and Sandman is on leave, so he should be there, I explained. I thanked Brian again for everything, and he promised to take care of my family, including Jess, if things went wrong. I spent the rest of the day resting and preparing. Once it was dark, I dressed in black, checked my weapon one last time, and left the motel. Driving through town, I reflected on my past with Sandman and how it had come to this. I parked far from the Bates house, grabbed my gear, and made my way to the mansion. Knowing the layout from my high school days with Susan, I reached the perimeter quickly. Using night vision equipment, I saw Kelly leaving in her BMW. I waited 5 minutes to ensure she didn't return before approaching the house. Peeking through a window, I saw Sandman in the dining room with a glass of wine. I quietly entered through the garage and crawled into the kitchen, staying low. Sandman was at the dining table with his back to me, engrossed in some papers. I prepared myself mentally, knowing I might have to shoot him in the back. As I raised my weapon, Sandman somehow sensed me and hit the floor. My first shot missed, and he fired back, hitting my shoulder. Pain shot through me as I realized he was armed, even on leave. I knew I was outmatched and made a run for the garage door, firing for cover. Suddenly the lights went out and I tripped. 4 shots hit the door where I had just been. Fear gripped me. Sandman was coming for me and I was losing blood. I decided to go out fighting. I fired blindly toward where I thought he might be, but I heard nothing. Then the driveway lights came on, revealing Sandman on the floor, dazed from a graze to the head. A knife lay between us, and as I reached for it, Sandman regained consciousness. "Never bring a knife to a weapon fight, Roger," he taunted. But before he could act, blood splattered as Sandman fell dead. Brian had arrived just in time. He dragged me outside, stopped my bleeding, and went back into the house for a few minutes before driving us away at high speed. When I woke up, I was at Brian's house, sore but alive, thanks to a retired doctor friend of his. I had been unconscious for days, but Sandman was dead. I returned to the cabin with Jess to recover and followed the news about Greg Sands' end of life. The police concluded that 2 armed intruders had ambushed him, and there were no leads. Brian had erased the evidence during those crucial 5 minutes, and Sandman was given a hero's funeral. But dead was dead. I planned to confront Kelly, but she knocked me to it. True to her selfish nature, she took her own life with Sandman's weapon, leaving a note saying she couldn't live without him. It felt hollow that I didn't get to end it on my terms, but she always stayed one step ahead. Now, I'm driving to Brian's beach house with Jess beside me for a family reunion. Roger Easton remains dead, but Jess doesn't care as long as Justin Green survives. As I drive, I reflect on love, friendship, and betrayal. The past is the past. It doesn't define the future. I will survive.
Before that turning point, Judith and Rick's relationship was strong, built on admiration and shared dreams. They met 15 years ago, fresh out of Rutgers University, and quickly bonded at a friend's party. After 2 years of dating, they moved in together and later married. They built a stable home and had 2 sons, Will and Robert, whom they raised with love. Judith had a successful career as a designer, and Rick was a supportive husband. However, as Judith's career took off, things shifted. Her long work hours began to strain the family. Though Rick was patient, subtle cracks in their relationship started to appear. Judith reassured herself that she could juggle her career and family life, believing she had it all under control. Judith often reflected on her good fortune, feeling lucky for her full life. At 40-something, she still admired her appearance, a tall, fit blonde with youthful eyes. These thoughts vanished as she packed for her upcoming trip to San Diego. She folded her clothes carefully and made sure her luggage was ready before Rick and the boys returned. The trip was a reward from Dalton Industries for a successful project launch. Judith was excited, though Rick hadn't been thrilled about her being away again. She had worked hard to convince him, and he eventually agreed, though not happily. Judith, a top designer at Casual Creations, specialized in packaging design. Her recent project was a success, and she was proud of her work, even though it meant spending long hours away from her family. As she prepared dinner that evening, she thought about the previous night with Rick. Their lovemaking had been intense, more passionate than usual. The memory made her want to make the evening special before leaving. Dinner was ready, and everything was on schedule as Rick and the boys arrived. Judith didn't want to dwell on the past. Right now, her focus was on her family, her husband Rick and their 2 boys, Will and Robert. Will, nearly 9, was carefree, while 7-year-old Robert was more serious. They balanced each other well, and Judith loved them equally. She and Rick had met at a party 15 years ago, instantly connecting despite attending Rutgers without crossing paths. After dating for 2 years, they moved in together and eventually married. She cherished the memory of Rick's proposal, and their life had been wonderful. When they were ready, they were blessed with 2 healthy boys. Judith had it all, though a slight chill ran through her at the thought, which she brushed off as nerves about her trip. She greeted her boys with hugs as they came home, Rick following close behind. She embraced Rick, noticing his tension. Although he relaxed, there was a shadow in his eyes. "You don't have to go, you know. We all want you to stay," Rick said, looking into her eyes. "It's too late now. It's just a quick business trip," she replied, attempting another hug, but he moved toward the powder room. Dinner was lively, with the boys talking about their day and upcoming school projects. Will wanted to make an erupting volcano for the science fair, while Robert preferred something unique. Their banter was good-natured, and Rick let them go on before eventually stepping in. Judith enjoyed the moment, but soon it was time to get ready. Rick insisted they'd clean up later. Packed and ready, Judith hugged and kissed her boys before sending them off to play. She turned to Rick. "I'll miss you all. It's just 3 nights. You'll pick me up Wednesday, right?" Rick nodded with a smile. "Don't worry. It's all set. You go enjoy yourself." Judith noticed the same darkness in his eyes, but before she could say anything, A car horn interrupted them. "That's Rachel. I'd better go," she said, giving Rick a quick hug and kiss before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. She glanced back, but Rick had already gone inside. Feeling uneasy, she told herself it was just her imagination. In the car, Rachel joked, 3 days at Redstone. Too bad you're so happily married. Could have been fun." Judith laughed, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too late to turn back now. At the airport, Judith checked her bags, went through security, and found her gate. Just as she sat down, Wes Southern joined her with a grin. "Ready for San Diego? Too bad we can't skip the meetings and just stay in bed," he joked, referencing their previous encounters. Judith smiled despite her unease, knowing they'd have plenty of time together during the trip. She and Wes had started their affair 2 months earlier after a long day at work. Exhausted, they fell asleep on her office couch, and when she woke, she mistook Wes's touch for Rick's. Guilt battled pleasure, but she gave in. What began as a one-time encounter soon became more frequent, though they kept it casual and secret, using protection to avoid complications. Over time, her guilt faded, and she resumed closeness with Rick, though something still felt off. Judith convinced herself the affair wasn't serious and that it didn't affect her marriage. This trip, although it gave her time alone with Wes, still felt work-related and not like a full-blown affair. She rationalized that everything would return to normal afterward, and she would refocus on Rick. In San Diego, after checking in, Judith called home and spoke to her boys for an hour. But when she asked for Rick, they said he was upstairs and quickly hung up. She was confused. Why had Rick been so quick to get rid of her? Could he suspect something? She brushed off the thought, assuming it was just guilt, and met Wes for dinner. After dinner, they headed to her room, eager to be together. The night was filled with passion, and they eventually fell asleep before dawn. But in the early morning, as Judith drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she felt a deep sense of loneliness and sadness. The intensity of it woke her, repeating, "No, no, no." Drenched in sweat, she got up and stood in the shower, trying to wash away the feeling. The 3 days flew by, with nights filled with sex between Judith and Wes. Though it had always been exciting due to the secrecy, it soon began to feel routine. The thrill faded, and by the end of the trip, they both agreed to end the affair on good terms. Judith was eager to return home to Rick and the boys, but she hadn't been able to reach them the last 2 nights. Her calls went unanswered, with only the answering machine picking up. At the airport, she tried calling Rick's office, but there was no answer, so she left a reminder about picking her up. She boarded the plane and quickly fell asleep, despite Wes's joking comment about joining the Mile High Club. When they landed at Kennedy, Wes stayed behind as Judith headed to baggage claim, expecting Rick to be there, but instead of Rick, she saw a man holding a sign with her name. He explained he was sent to pick her up and take her home. Assuming Rick was just busy, Judith agreed and got into the limo. She called Rick's phone again, but only got his voicemail. Now she was starting to worry. The drive seemed endless, and all her attempts to contact Rick failed. When they finally reached her house, it looked dark and deserted. Before she could get out, the driver handed her an envelope with her name on it in Rick's handwriting. Feeling panicked, she grabbed her bag and rushed inside. The house was quiet with only a few lights on. She searched every room, but no one was home. Upstairs in their bedroom, everything seemed normal until she noticed Rick's closet door was open, something he never left that way. When she looked closer, she realized all of his clothes were gone. Rick had left. Feeling sick to her stomach, Judith slowly walked into her boys' room. The beds were made, but their computers, favorite posters, and clothes were all gone. Panic rising, she ran downstairs searching for a note, then remembered the manila envelope. Grabbing it from the kitchen table, she tore it open and collapsed into a chair. Inside were photos, a report from Spaulding Investigations, and a document titled Decree for Dissolution of Marriage. Judith screamed. Overwhelmed by grief, she cried uncontrollably, pleading for another chance, throwing dishes in her despair until she finally passed out. When she woke to the morning sunlight, she numbly gathered the papers she'd thrown across the room. The first thing she saw were the photos. Incriminating shots of her and Wes. She rushed to the sink, her stomach turning, then returned to the table, pushing the rest of the pictures aside. The report detailed her affair, with dates, times, and photo references documenting her betrayal. Judith didn't have the strength to read more and laid the report down. The legal document, thick and official, sat there, but she couldn't face reading it. Instead, she opened the envelope with a note from Rick. The letter began, "Judith, by now you know the boys and I are gone. I took our clothes, some of the boys' important things, and my stuff from the den. We're in a small apartment for now until we divide our assets," Rick continued, explaining how he found out about the affair. One night, after she said she'd be working late, he brought her a milkshake, only to discover her with Wes in her office. He had watched briefly, then left with the milkshake, thankful the boys had stayed in the car. That night, he told her he had a headache, a night she likely wouldn't even remember. She remembered that night vividly. It was the first time she and Wes had slept together. Overcome with guilt, she had dreaded facing Rick. But when she got home, Rick said he wasn't feeling well, and she was relieved she didn't have to talk to him. She even said a small prayer of thanks. Rick's letter continued, explaining how he had hired a private investigator, hoping it was just a one-time mistake. But it wasn't. The investigator easily installed a camera in her office after Rick copied her key. Rick admitted he couldn't look at many of the photos, though she seemed to be enjoying herself with Wes. When Judith mentioned the business trip, Rick had already planned to move out while she was gone. He learned Wes was joining her, though she had lied about who would be there. Rick expressed his anger, feeling betrayed, not just by the affair, but by the deliberate deception. He could have forgiven a single mistake, but not a planned betrayal. Rick assured her his lawyer would contact her soon, and he hoped they could settle custody and visitation peacefully. Though he no longer loved her, he wanted the boys to stay in their home. He ended the letter by saying they had nothing more to discuss and that he was done with her. Judith now understood the fear and dread she had been feeling. It was her conscience trying to warn her. But it was too late. Rick was gone, and she had lost everything. Years passed, and Judith and Rick led separate lives, both achieving success in their careers. Judith owned her own company, having built it through hard work. Sitting in her office, she shuffled papers on her desk, trying to make a decision. She reminded herself she didn't need to please anyone but her client, yet she was struggling. She thought about how Rick had always been a great sounding board for her ideas. She picked up her 3 best concepts and murmured, "Let's see what he'd think of these." She started with the weakest one, imagining Rick's feedback, knowing it needed improvement. Then she moved on to the next. Still nothing. Damn, he was tough. That's why I always turned to him for advice. Okay, here's the last one. 2 people are holding hands, walking down the street, unaware of a speeding car heading toward them. The man says, "I got the papers from our Continental insurance agent today. We're covered for anything." In the background, the car swerves and hits a light pole instead. They walk away, oblivious to the danger. "Yeah, that's the best one. The client will like it. I'll have Clark start on it tomorrow. Tonight I'm too tired." I stood up, turned off the light, and saw Will in the doorway. He smiled sadly. "Talking to Dad again?" "Yeah, it helps," I said. And it did. Talking to Rick always made things clearer. "What are you doing up? You have school tomorrow?" "Just getting water. I'm not missing the final game tomorrow." "Neither am I. We'll be behind the bench cheering you on." He smiled and walked off to bed. Tomorrow was the final basketball game, and if Will's team won, they'd go to the state quarterfinals. It was a long shot, but Will, a starting guard and senior, was hopeful. He was tall, strong, and had the talent for a scholarship. He was his father's son. I followed him to the kitchen, watching him finish his water before waving goodnight. I sat down, not ready for bed. Will was smart, not as brilliant as Robert, but still sharp. He had heard me talking to Rick again, and while he accepted it, Robert hated it. Rick and I divorced after 15 years of marriage, and today marked 8 years since it became official. It was my fault, and I had told the boys when they were old enough. Will took it hard, but eventually forgave me. Robert took longer. After the divorce, Rick never tried to take the boys away from me. He wanted unlimited visitation, and I agreed because having my boys was all I had left. When I went through dark times, Rick took the boys until I was stable. They supported me, likely with Rick's help, and were the reason I kept going. As they grew older, they spent more time at home and less with Rick, who was busy with work. I let them have their freedom, and they became strong, confident young men. Rick and I rarely spoke except about the boys. Financially, we were both stable, so there were no issues with alimony or child support. Over the years, we found a way to cooperate and support each other when needed. It was a peaceful, comfortable arrangement. After several hard years, I don't think Rick ever forgave me, but at least he no longer seemed to hate me. That was a relief. I still talk to him in my mind because I never stopped loving him or relying on his advice. Even though he wasn't there, I could imagine our conversations clearly, and it always helped. It kept me sane, especially during the dark times after our divorce when I almost drowned in depression. Rick was cold for the first 2 years after the divorce. He wouldn't speak to me or let me explain, though I wasn't even sure why I did what I did. His lawyer handled everything, and when I resisted, Rick threatened to change the divorce terms and take the boys. I gave in and signed what he wanted. After the divorce, I spiraled. I threw myself into my job, the only thing I had besides my boys. Though Wes was still around, we had no contact by mutual agreement, but he bragged about our affair, which hurt my reputation at work. People saw me differently, and I became isolated. One night, a colleague asked me out. I initially refused, but then accepted, thinking it might help me move on. I drank too much, and we ended up at his place. The Zex was rough and quick, leaving me feeling empty, but I convinced myself I didn't need Rick. Over the next few weeks, I went on more dates, but they all ended the same, unsatisfying and leaving me feeling used. One night, I woke up on the floor of my living room, disheveled and alone, with only vague memories of the evening. I couldn't remember who I had been with, but I knew I had hit rock bottom. That night, I realized how far I'd fallen. Shame and disgust washed over me, and I questioned what I had become. Thankfully, my boys were with their father that weekend, sparing them from seeing me at my lowest. Eventually, I calmed down enough to clean up and make some important decisions. I found an old phone book in Rick's office and scheduled a doctor's appointment. I also resigned from my job, knowing I had to move forward. My sons kept me going, but I was alone most days while they were in school. I came close to doing something reckless more than once, but I didn't, which was a miracle. Before I lost everything, I saw a therapist, Cheryl Hopkins, recommended by my doctor. She put me on medication and helped me slowly regain control of my life. At first, I barely held on, but over time, I fought my way back. Through therapy, I realized that even though I had everything, a successful career, 2 wonderful boys, and a loving husband, it wasn't enough for me. I didn't know why, but I went looking for something more. That's how my affair with Wes began. He was attractive and flirtatious, and I responded. The thrill of the forbidden outweighed the guilt, and we started an affair that lasted 3 months, culminating in the San Diego trip. But it cost me my marriage. I continued working, but my reputation had suffered. Wes had talked about our affair, and I became known more for that than my professional skills. Though I had the option of claiming sexual discrimination, I chose not to stir trouble as long as they left me alone. I also made poor decisions by dating men who took advantage of my vulnerability. These meaningless encounters left me feeling empty, and I eventually realized I had hit rock bottom. That's when I called my doctor and began the long climb out of my depression, with Cheryl's relentless support. It took 2 years, but I finally recovered, though I still check in with her occasionally. I quit my job and left that chapter behind, but I needed to work for my own sanity. Rick had left me the house and enough financial support, but I wanted to build something new. So I started my own business, J. Proctor Packaging Concepts, from home. I used some equity from the house to get a loan and bought the necessary equipment: a high-performance computer, color copier, drafting board, and tools for graphic design and packaging. With that, I began rebuilding my life. At the time, Will had just turned 13 and Robert was 11. They helped a lot, giving me time to work in the evenings while they entertained themselves. It was a good setup. We compromised. I took them to their games, and they gave me quiet time to focus on my business. They understood what I was trying to do, and we worked as a team. It was a great period in my life as I started gaining clients. At first, I got a few referrals from former colleagues. I lost the first 2 accounts but secured the third, and my business began to grow. As it expanded, I hired a small team to handle calls, drafts, and sales. I had a small office built behind the house, which worked perfectly. Over the next 2 years, my business grew steadily, and I became financially successful, paying off my loans. Fast forward a few more years. Will was 17, Robert was almost 16, and I had turned 48. My business was thriving with 12 employees, and I kept it small, focusing on clients who wanted top-quality work. I was financially secure, and the boys had everything they needed. I didn't rely on Rick much anymore, and he agreed to put his support payments into a college fund for the boys. Will was likely to get a basketball scholarship to Ohio State, and Robert, being academically gifted, would easily secure one too. Both boys were popular. Will had a serious girlfriend, and Robert was starting to date as well. My business success brought social connections, and I was well known in the community, often invited to important events. But one thing was missing. I didn't date. Since crawling out of the emotional hole I had fallen into, I hadn't cared about any man. I had plenty of offers from wealthy single men, but I wasn't interested. I only cared about one man, Rick. When Rick left me, it was dramatic. He packed up and moved out while I was on a 3-day trip with Wes. I told Rick it was for business, which was true, but I didn't mention Wes. Rick already knew, though. He had everything documented. I foolishly believed I could keep the affair hidden, thinking consequences were for others. Ironically, during that trip, I realized I was done with cheating. I thought about Rick the whole time I was with Wes. By the end of the trip, I had recommitted to my marriage. But when I returned, Rick had already left, leaving behind photos, divorce papers, and a blunt letter saying we were finished. I deserved it. That triggered my depression, which took 2 years to overcome. Then I spent another 5 years building my business. Despite the divorce, I still considered myself married, holding on to the promise I made to myself on the plane ride back from San Diego, to rededicate myself to Rick. Even though it was too late, my pride wouldn't let me break that promise. During those years, I met several interesting men. I fantasized about a few, even having some erotic dreams, but my only indulgence was a blue toy I kept locked away. I used it occasionally when my boys were out for the night, and though I started thinking of those men, I always ended up thinking of Rick when I climaxed. Strange, right? Life, however, kept moving forward. The night after I had one of those thoughts, Robert and I were at Will's basketball game, and his team pulled off a huge upset, winning and advancing to the state quarterfinals. Will was ecstatic, and Robert was just as thrilled. Proud of my boys, I agreed to let Will's team celebrate at our house. We had the space, a pool, and enough parent chaperones to keep everything under control. The night was a success, and I set about rearranging my schedule to be there for the upcoming regional game. The next day, while working on my schedule in the kitchen, the phone rang. Without checking the caller ID, I answered, "Hello, this is Judith Proctor." Balancing the phone on my shoulder, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a while. Rick. "Hi, Judith. It's me." His familiar voice sent a chill through me. "Yes, I recognized your voice. Good to hear from you. How have you been?" I replied. "Good. I was wondering about the regional game schedule. I want to see Will play, but don't know the details." "I'm just planning that now," I said. "The game is next Saturday in Columbus. Robert and I are driving down Friday night. We've got tickets, including one for you." "Could we get together for dinner?" Rick asked, surprising me. "The 4 of us before the game? I'd also like to sit with you and Robert during the game." Dinner together? We hadn't done that in the 8 years since our divorce. We were civil for the boys, but never spent time as a family. "Sure, that would be great," I replied, still processing the unexpected invitation. Will would love to see us together. I told him we were staying at the Madison Hotel, while the other families had rooms at the Marriott Courtyard. Rick was listed under Will's family, so booking a room would be easy. As I hung up, I couldn't help but wonder why he wanted to have dinner with us. Was it something new? Was he engaged? Or was there another reason for this sudden change? Rick mentioned he liked the idea of staying at the hotel and might book a room there. I said goodbye, still in shock from the call, and hoped I hadn't missed anything important. I pushed my emotions aside and finished my scheduling, which now felt even more significant. After all, I was going to have dinner with my ex-husband. The ex part didn't matter much to me. I didn't mention the dinner to Will or Robert until right before we left. Will had already spoken to Rick, knowing he planned to attend the game and spend time with them, but said nothing about us eating together. The night before the trip, I made sure the boys were packed and then called them to the kitchen for apple pie, something they both loved. "Boys, I have news. The three of us are having dinner with your father the night before the game. He called and asked, and I said yes." I expected a reaction, but neither of them said a word. They just kept eating. Their casual attitude surprised me, but then I realized they saw it as normal for such a big event. To them, it wasn't a big deal, but to me, it was huge. I hadn't shared a meal with Rick in nearly 8 years. "Well, it's a big deal to me," I said. "I'm excited." Will looked up and smiled. "We know it's a big deal, Mom. Dad asked us if we were okay with it, and we said yes." I felt embarrassed. "Why didn't you tell me? I made such a fuss." Will reassured me. "You're the coolest, Mom. The team thinks so too. Dad's looking forward to it, and it'll be great if we can all get along." They teased me for overreacting, but I sensed their excitement too. After cleaning up, I packed the car, but my nerves only grew. I couldn't shake the thought that Rick had found someone new and would use this dinner to tell us. He had dated before, including a serious relationship with Leslie Wells a few years back, and I remembered how sick that conversation made me. Though their relationship ended, I feared Rick might now be ready for something more permanent, and dinner would be the moment he'd break the news. Rick's second serious relationship was about 1.5 years ago with a younger woman, Jean Chambers. She was at least 10 years younger than him. At first I found it amusing, but then I became concerned when he used the word love to describe her. I ended the conversation quickly. He never mentioned her again, but I assumed they were still together. I made it clear to my boys that their father's relationships were off limits in conversations with me, and they respected that. I was convinced this dinner was Rick's way of telling us he was going to propose to Jean. Rick would tell us before making it official. He was always polite and considerate. He had every right to move on, especially after what I did to him, but the thought still stung. The next day, we set off for the drive to Columbus for Will's quarterfinal game. Will was with his team on the bus, and Robert and I drove separately. I wanted to arrive early enough to shower, change, and prepare for dinner. I had a new dress, shoes, and jewelry, and even wore the perfume Rick bought me years ago. I wanted him to remember what he had walked away from. After checking in at the hotel, I let Robert have his own room, explaining he'd have to share with Will later. We decided to check if the team's bus had arrived, but we had beaten it by over an hour. While Robert led the way, I browsed the hotel lobby and nearby shops. Eventually, the bus arrived, and we saw Will with his girlfriend, Jill. After greeting her, Will spotted us and came over. He and Robert went to their room to change, while I headed back to the lobby to window shop and people watch. A short while later, I saw Rick walk in. It was both a shock and a thrill to see him again. I didn't make myself known, but watched as he checked in, efficiently as always. He still looked great, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of memories. Even when I fantasized about other men, it was Rick who always came to mind. I went back to my room to get ready and composed myself, making sure I was calm when Rick called. After finishing my hair and makeup, I checked on the boys. They were talking about the game, full of excitement. They looked handsome in clean shirts and pressed jeans. Okay, I pressed their jeans, but still. I returned to my room to finish getting ready. I wanted to put on my dress at the last moment to avoid wrinkles. As I fastened my necklace, the phone rang. It was Rick. "Are you ready?" he asked. 5 minutes, I replied, trying to steady my nerves. After hanging up, I started to panic. The reality of sitting down to dinner with Rick hit me hard. I called to the boys, and when they came into my room, Will whistled. "Wow, Mom, you look hot," he said with a grin. His compliment choked me up. I smiled and kissed him on the forehead, and as he pretended to protest, he whispered, "Go for it, Mom." I was ready. With Will's encouragement, my fears faded. I decided to enjoy the evening with my handsome sons and ex-husband, ignoring the consequences. I linked arms with the boys, and we headed to the elevator to meet Rick. Rick stood in the lobby holding a small box. When he saw us, he smiled and walked over. For a moment, we looked like a regular family: husband, wife, and 2 sons. Rick complimented me, saying I looked beautiful, and I thanked him, blushing. He greeted Robert with a teasing remark and shook Will's hand, sharing a meaningful glance with him. Then he handed Will the box. "This was given to me by my father when I went to college," Rick said. "Now it's time to pass it on to you." Will hesitated, then opened the box to reveal a gold pocket watch, intricately engraved. He admired it, clearly moved by the gesture. Robert was excited too, showing no jealousy. I felt a surge of pride in my boys, and a tear welled up in my eye, which I quickly wiped away. "Shall we sit down?" I said, trying to keep things light. Rick, understanding, gently took my arm, and we were seated in the restaurant. Rick sat next to me while Will and Robert sat across, both grinning. Dinner was fun. The boys devoured burgers and fries, while I had a salad and sandwich. Rick enjoyed a steak, and we all laughed and talked easily. For dessert, the boys had pie. Rick ordered sorbet, and I skipped. My dress was tight enough as it was. After dinner, the boys left to meet their curfew, leaving me alone with Rick for the first time in years. Surprisingly, I wasn't scared. I had already lost him long ago. Rick ordered coffee, and I nodded in agreement, wanting the evening to continue. We sat in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company. I realized how much I had missed this connection. I wondered why we couldn't have parted as friends, but I knew the answer. The pain I had caused him was too deep to easily forgive. The waiter brought our coffee, pouring it for us before stepping away. Now we were truly alone. I wasn't sure what to say and wondered if I should be the one to start. After all, wasn't this the conversation I had wanted for so long but never had? Should I take the chance now and say the things I'd kept bottled up? Just as I worked up the nerve to speak, Rick turned to me. "Judith, can I ask you something? Just a few things that have been on my mind for a while, if that's okay." I was relieved that he started the conversation. "Of course, Rick. Anything. Just ask." He hesitated, then asked, "Is it true you talk to me as if I'm there? As if I'm actually with you?" That's what he wanted to ask? God, I'd prayed for this opportunity. "Yes, it's true," I admitted. "I've always done that, ever since I started the business. I valued your advice so much that, when you weren't around, I pretended you were. I knew you so well that I could imagine what you'd say, so I filled in for you. You have no idea how much you've helped me." Rick looked at me, surprised. "Why didn't you just call me for advice? Wouldn't that have made more sense?" "Rick, you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. We both know why. So why would I call you for advice?" I asked, holding his gaze. He nodded in understanding and looked away. For a moment, I thought I'd been too blunt, but then he turned back to me. "You never date," Rick said suddenly. "Why is that? I know things didn't work out after the divorce, but you're still beautiful and successful. I know plenty of men would love to go out with you. Why haven't you dated?" It was the question I'd expected, and I was ready for it. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. What did I have to lose? I made a mistake 8 years ago, and I paid the price for it. I had no choice but to pay it, and I have. But after working with Cheryl Hopkins, my therapist, I realized there was only one man for me, and that man was you. I saw him about to object, so I quickly added, "Before you say anything, you need to understand. I made that promise on the flight home from San Diego. Wes and I had already ended our affair. I was ready to recommit to our marriage and to you. I realize now how naive that was, to think I could just walk back into your life after what I'd done. but nothing I did then was reasonable or fair. I know that now. I screwed up, Rick. It was all my fault. I take full responsibility. I watched Rick process what I was saying. Taking another deep breath, I continued. After the divorce, I promised myself I'd be the perfect wife for you, even though I knew I couldn't be with you anymore. I've kept that promise, Rick. Even though we're divorced, I've stayed faithful. Dating someone else would feel like cheating on you. And I can't do that. I won't do that. Rick looked confused, unsure of what to say. I smiled gently and, after a few moments of silence, added, "And I'll tell you something the boys don't know. Sometimes I think of, let's just say inappropriate things I'd like to do with other men. But guess who I always end up with in my dreams?" Rick still looked puzzled, so I waited a few seconds before revealing the truth. "You, Rick. Even in my dreams, I can't cheat on you. I may imagine other men at first, but you're always the one I end up with." Watching his expression, I couldn't help but laugh. It was too funny. He had no idea how to respond, and for the first time in 8 years, I had the upper hand. God, how good it felt to say something serious, funny, and absurd to my ex-husband without any fighting or drama. It was just fun, and I realized I was enjoying myself. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "I just wanted to tell you the truth, whether you believe it or not. I know my credibility isn't exactly your top priority." Rick shook his head, still unsure how to take it or what to say. "I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, but that's fine. One more question, if you don't mind. What are your plans for the future? If you don't date and won't date anyone else, do you plan to stay single for the rest of your life? I can't believe that's what you want." Yes. There wasn't anything else to say. That was my choice, and I made it 6 years ago, after I emerged from that dark place. I explained it to Cheryl, and she accepted it as a reasonable decision. I had my reasons, and she knew them, so she never tried to change my mind. Rick looked at me, his eyes locked on mine. I met his gaze, my confidence in my own life and decisions giving me the strength to stand firm. If I couldn't have Rick because of what I did to him, then I'd paid the price, and I was free to make my own choices. I chose to be alone. Rick was still processing everything I had told him. I had been honest, given him the truth, and he knew it. There wasn't much for him to say, so he stayed quiet. I suggested we move to the lounge for a nightcap, and he gave me a look I didn't recognize. After 8 years, though, people change. Rick slid out of the booth, reached back to offer me his hand, and led me to the lounge. As I followed, I admired him from behind. He really was a striking man. He stopped to pay the bill while I waited in the lobby, noticing a few glances from men nearby. I was used to that kind of attention, and ignored most of it, except for a few interesting looks. But I never gave the wrong impression. No flirtatious gestures, no lingering eyes, nothing to suggest I was available. Rick came over, took my arm gently, and guided me into the lounge. We sat at a small table in the back, and instead of sitting across from me, he chose to sit beside me. I was pleasantly surprised and smiled widely. He smiled back. "Judith, I have to tell you something. Over the past 3 years, I've hired a private investigator to check up on you, just to prove to myself that Will and Robert weren't exaggerating about how you lived. I never wanted to invade your privacy, but I couldn't help but wonder about your personal life." My smile faded. After everything I'd done, I deserved to be punished. But what right did he have to keep tabs on me after all this time? It wasn't fair, and I felt a surge of anger. For the first time in years, I knew I had to say something to Rick, even if it risked pushing him away. After 8 years and a divorce where you cut me out of your life, you decided to investigate me? I never did that to you. I told the boys not to discuss you or bring your affairs or flings into my home. I respected your privacy. Why couldn't you do the same for me? "I'm sorry," he said. At first I told myself it was to protect the boys, but I knew that wasn't true. You were a great mother, and they've told me countless times how much they adored you and how you gave them everything they needed to thrive. Then I told myself I just wanted to see how you lived without a husband. That was closer to the truth. It shocked me to see how you lived. Never dating, only going out with women or clients. I couldn't understand why, and it drove me crazy. That's part of why I wanted to join you tonight and for the game tomorrow. I needed to see for myself that you're happy and content with your life. And I'm convinced you are. You're happier and more at peace than I ever saw you before. It's a real improvement. I listened carefully to everything Rick said, and strangely enough, I believed him. The Rick I knew wouldn't invade my privacy without a reason. This was his way, and I understood him. He was still looking out for me, and for our sons, of course. Well, I guess you had your reasons, but I would have appreciated it more if you had just asked me. We talked from time to time. You could have asked. Would you have answered me? Honestly? Yes, Rick, I would have. This is who I am now, the person I became 5 years ago. I'm not the same woman who cheated on you, the one you shattered. I know who I am now, and I know what I did. I've paid the price. What's the saying? Do the crime, do the time. Well, I did the crime, and the time afterward was hell. For 3 years, I lived in darkness. First the divorce, then the fallout, the depression, the downfall. But I picked myself up and moved on. So yes, I would have told you everything. I would have welcomed the chance to explain why I did what I did. I prayed for the chance to say 2 things to you, Rick. Just 2 simple things. You were never at fault for any of it, and I'm so sorry for what I did. Rick listened intently, and when I finished, his eyes widened. I could see a glassiness in them, as if he was fighting back tears. Rick was a proud, strong man, and I knew how hard it was for him to let me see him like this. So, like any loving wife would do, I stood and excused myself to the ladies' room. I moved quickly to protect myself from breaking down in front of him. Once inside, I let myself go. I cried to release the tension, and when I finished, I was done. I had said what needed to be said. I was proud of myself, and I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Those simple words had been incredibly powerful. I rinsed my face with water, reapplied my lipstick, and put a few drops in my eyes to hide the redness. I looked at my reflection. Yes, I was ready to go back. When I returned to the table, Rick was sitting with his hands folded in front of him. He looked up as I approached and greeted me with a huge smile, a look of pride. Proud to be with me. Be still, my heart. Silly girl. He stood like the gentleman he always was, and waited until I sat down. Then he surprised me by saying, "Thank you for giving me time to compose myself. You always did know me better than I knew myself." "I did," I replied, "but that's because I loved you so much. It came naturally. It still does, Rick. I still love you, you know." I nearly tensed, preparing for his reaction. I was ready for anything: anger, pain, disgust, surprise, even embarrassment. Any of those would make sense from someone I'd hurt as deeply as I hurt Rick. I was prepared for the worst. What he said next completely surprised me. "I believe you, Judith. I really do believe you love me now, and that you loved me then. I never doubted that. My actions weren't because I thought you loved Wes more than me. I divorced you because your betrayal hurt so badly that I couldn't find a way forward with you. And I tried. I really tried. When I found out what you were doing, I asked myself if I could forgive and forget. I was almost ready to accept it as a mistake we could move past. Then you lied about the San Diego trip and who you were going with. That's when I knew my love wasn't enough. I had no choice." As I listened, my heart broke. Not for me, but for him. His voice softened as he continued, "You might not believe me, but walking away was the hardest decision I ever made, because like you, I never stopped loving you. Even knowing what you did, I couldn't stop loving you. I just couldn't forgive you. And I knew I'd never forget." "Rick, please, let's not go there. I understand, and I don't blame you for not forgiving me. I know what I did, and I carry that shame. You've been fair with me, always cooperative when it came to our sons. You've never thrown my mistakes in my face. All I can say is thank you for giving me this time to say what I needed to. It's a gift I'll always cherish. Thank you." Rick looked at me with that unfamiliar expression again. I didn't fully understand it, but it wasn't anger or resentment, so I was grateful. I felt good, like maybe we could become friends again. I wanted to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Tell me about Jean Chambers. Last I heard she was heading towards Sirius. Is she about to become the next Mrs. Proctor? My stomach flipped at the mention of her, but I thought if I brought it up, he'd feel comfortable mentioning his future plans. His expression shifted to surprise. Maybe he hadn't planned to talk about her. Maybe it was still too soon. He shook his head and said, I haven't seen Jean in almost 2 years. Surprised you even remembered her. Really? You mentioned once that you thought you might actually love her. I assumed marriage was in the cards. I was smitten at the time. She was young, ambitious, and I thought I could keep up. Boy, was I wrong. We broke up not long after. I said I'm not seeing anyone now. Haven't been with anyone since her. But why? I couldn't help asking. You're still as attractive as ever, and you have everything a woman would want. You're successful, good-looking, great in bed, and well off. What's stopping you? I just haven't found anyone who satisfies me completely. The women I've dated were either too pushy, not assertive enough, bad in bed, or just looking for someone to take care of them. None of them had what I needed. He paused, then looked at me seriously. There was one who had it all, but it didn't work out. I took the bait, eager to hear more. This was my Rick. Even if what he said hurt me, it was wonderful to just sit here and talk with him. Why didn't it work out? Was she foolish enough to let you slip away? Who was this crazy woman? It was you. And yes, she was foolish. She pushed me away. It's too bad because she was perfect for me. My breath came in shallow gasps. This was it. My chance for something I had given up hope on ever having again. If I didn't take the risk now, I would regret it forever. I might crash and burn, but I'd go down fighting. Heart in hand, I went for it. Maybe she learned her lesson, Rick. Maybe she's smarter now and knows what she'd have with a man like you. Maybe she's ready for you now, ready for a life together with all that comes with it. I'm sure she wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Do you think that's possible? Could she be different this time? Why wouldn't she make the same mistakes again? He asked quietly. I don't think I could take that kind of pain again. It hurt too much the first time. I think she'd rather die than make those mistakes again. She knows how much pain she caused those she loved. I think she'd die before doing that again. In fact, I know she would. I know it with all my heart. Rick looked at me and I held my breath. Could he forgive me? Had time softened his heart enough to dull the pain I caused him, allowing him to love me again? I looked into his eyes, holding his gaze, hoping the person I had become would be clear if he looked closely enough. He said nothing but reached for my hand. I gave it to him, still holding my breath. If he didn't speak soon, I felt like I would burst. This night had taken a turn I never expected. He had gone all the way back, offering a chance I thought was lost forever, and I wasn't sure I could hold on much longer without screaming. I believe you because I want to believe you, Judith. I have to believe you if I want to be happy. I haven't been happy in the last 8 years. I've tried to forget you and move on, but that's been a failure. None of those women were you. That's who I was searching for. I finally realized that there's only ever been one woman for me. My heart soared at his words. But then he paused and his tone shifted. But Judith, the only thing I can say today is that I forgive you. I forgive you for destroying my family and my marriage. I've tried to move on for years, but I couldn't. Something was always holding me back. Now I realize it was my anger. I'm letting it go. I don't have any emotions left that tie me to you. You said I devastated you for 8 years. No, I didn't. It was the consequences of your actions. I just reacted to what you did. Now I feel nothing for you, no anger, no hate, and finally, no love. Then he stood up and walked away. Will's team lost in the quarterfinals, but we all cheered him on. He played brilliantly, and it was enough to earn him the scholarship he had worked so hard for. His father and I were so proud of him that night. He played his heart out, but accepted the loss with grace. He went on to play in college, earned a degree in business management, and joined his father's company after graduation. He worked his way up until Rick retired and passed the business to him. Along the way, Will married Jill, his high school sweetheart, and they now have 3 wonderful children. Robert earned an academic scholarship and attended Harvard. He wanted to be a lawyer, graduated with honors, and joined a law firm in New York City. He built a reputation as a fierce attorney and eventually started his own practice. He now has a team of 4 lawyers and recently proposed to a woman he met through one of his cases. They seem deeply in love, and we are hopeful for their future. Rick and I met several times over the years. He was always polite, too polite, and I could tell it was just out of courtesy. I still loved him, but he had nothing left for me. I couldn't blame him. I had made him the man he became. I kept my company, and we stayed successful in the industry. Over time, I let my partners take on more responsibility and worked less and less. When Rick handed his company over to Will, I made the tough decision to sell mine to a group of my employees. We reached an agreement, and I finally retired. I turned 60, and everyone came to celebrate. But as I mingled, smiling and chatting with everyone, I kept looking for Rick. I laughed and made small talk, but inside, I felt empty. I had a house, a car, and my sons, but no one to share my life with. Rick passed away a year later. He never remarried, all because of me. He died peacefully in his sleep. I saw him in the casket, white-haired, clean-shaven, and still handsome. Although he left me emotionally long ago, this time he was gone for good. I still visit his grave. I sit there, but I have no words for him. All I'm left with are regrets, wishing I had made different choices. But all I can do now is regret.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The office was cold when he arrived, but that was not so strange as the snow was falling heavily outside, creating the illusion of an untarnished world. He loved the solitude of the office at this time of the day. Everything was so peaceful. He turned up the heat in the office and began making coffee so that his coworkers would have something to take the edge off of the cold when they started to arrive in an hour or so. This had been his delegated task during every working day for the last 20 years of his employment. In the summer, the office was hot, so he would turn on the AC, and in the winter, he would take care of the heat. Over the years, this had become his favorite time of the workday. As he went about his appointed tasks, he thought about the ritual in accomplishing them. A ritual he had established during 20 years of preparing the office to greet its workers. Now that he was quickly approaching 30 years with the company, he marveled at how fast the time had gone. He also thought about the fact that in a few months he would be deprived of this morning detail as he had put in his paperwork to retire. He knew it was time. He felt it in his bones and in every ache of his arthritic hands. He also understood the fact that he would be retiring alone, a fact that still ate at his soul. Finishing all his tasks and preparing the office to accept the daily influx of workers, he grabbed a cup of freshly brewed coffee and sat heavily at his desk. This was the concluding part of his ritual when he got to bask in the enjoyment of his coffee and the quiet reflections on his life before the organized pandemonium of the new workday began. Sitting comfortably, he considered the photograph on his desk once again. The picture never changed, but his perceptions of it often did. Sometimes he was sad thinking about what he had lost. Other times, he was incensed thinking of what had been his but now wasn't. Today was unlike either of those types of days. Today he just felt muddled by the events of the last 18 months of his life. No matter how many times he had looked at the picture and observed the way she held both man's hands, a deep aching, born of the awareness that even on that happy occasion she was already another man's woman, would come over him as sure as the tide reaching the shore. The photograph itself was in a beautiful oaken frame, a gift to him by his lifelong best friend, Jerry Williams. As he focused on the photo for the millionth time, he took it all in again, reliving in his memory the time they had all flown down to St. Augustine, Florida for a small winter vacation, just the 3 of them, his wife, himself, and his best friend. Jerry had been living with them for the last few months after his last wife threw him out. As he had no place to go, we offered him a place to stay until he could get back on his feet. This little mini vacation to Florida was his idea, and Kathy had fallen in love with the idea. So, there we were, in Florida for a long weekend break. The setting of the picture was a quaint beachside restaurant where the 3 of us were sitting at a table, all clasping hands and smiling at the camera. Recalling the moment from his memory once again, they had been drinking and all of them were a bit tipsy. When another tourist passed by our table, Kathy had asked the man to take a picture of us all and had handed him Jerry's camera to perform the task. Looking back on it, I should have been tipped by the way she just appropriated the camera without even asking. You see, Jerry was really attached to his camera, and nobody touched it without his express permission. On that day, Kathy grabbed it and handed it over as if it was hers. Jerry never said a word, which I thought was strange at the time, but I put it down to his just being polite and avoiding any unpleasantness. The photograph itself showed the three of them sitting from left to the right at a bar's high-top table. On the far left of the photo was yours truly, Ryan Brown, with an actual smile on my face. It had been so long since he had really smiled that he now often wondered if he still had any left in him. Next to Ryan was his wife, Kathy. In the picture, his wife wore a smile which clearly showed her pleasure at being the focal point of the two men next to her. Sitting at the far right was his ex-best friend, Jerry. He picked up the frame and absorbed the details of the picture in the same way a military officer would study the photos from a bombing mission in an effort to determine the damage inflicted on the enemy. Kathy, his wife and the love of his life, was beautiful. Outside of that statement, nothing else really needed to be said. He had loved her since the first day he met her, and no matter what age or time had done to change her countenance, he never saw it because to him she was as beautiful as the first time he had laid eyes on her. As he looked at her face, he noted that her head was turned to her left towards Jerry, not to her right to share the moment with her husband. He also noted again the way she was holding his hand. Kathy was clasping his hand in a sterile fashion, barely holding on to it. In the previous months, he had examined that detail 100 times, and he had determined that the way she held his hand was symbolic. She was only nominally holding on to him as she focused on her true love sitting to her left. Now, for the millionth time, he again focused on her left hand, noting how her fingers were intertwined with Jerry's, clasping his hand so firmly you could see the white of her knuckles. Her grip was almost as if she was staking her claim on him and ensuring that he would not get away from her. Ryan shook his head in dismay as he wondered when it was that he had lost her love. Finally, Ryan now looked to the last person in the photo, his former best friend, and someone he had trusted since they were kids. Jerry had been my best friend since grade school. In fact, he was the guy who had actually introduced me to my wife. I thought that I knew Jerry better than any other person in my life, and still had a hard time believing that he would really have slept with Kathy. However, realizing that Jerry was Jerry, it was in retrospect not all that surprising. In high school, Jerry was on the weightlifting team and developed a terrific physique. To say he was popular with the girls would have been an understatement. The standing joke in our school was to call Jerry Tarzan. The name really seemed to fit because just like the king of the jungle, he seemed to control just about every woman he went after. However, by our senior year, the name Tarzan had taken on an insulting connotation as Jerry had broken up so many relationships. Jerry really came to hate the nickname, but he never saw the harm in stealing other men's girls. During the whole time we were in school, I stood by Jerry, even though it sickened me to watch him take girl after girl and use them for his pleasure. The amount of collateral damage he did was really immense, and by the end of high school, I was about the only friend he had left. I think that the problem with Jerry was that while he could get women, he just never seemed to be able to keep them, and this prompted him to keep taking them away from other guys. He once told me he liked the challenge. I guess that the reason I backed him during that time was that throughout school, Jerry had never done anything but good for me. I always knew that whatever happened, he would always have my back. After high school, I joined the Navy, and when I came back on leave, it was Jerry who set me up with Kathy. After she and I met, we were inseparable. Even though we had a long-distance relationship, we both lived for those precious moments when I could return home on leave. When I went back to my ship, she wrote religiously, and I knew that she was a keeper. Finally, my enlistment ended, and I was discharged. As soon as I got home, we were married, and I went to school on the GI Bill. Jerry was actually the best man at my wedding, even though Kathy's parents hated him with a passion. I asked her why her parents did not like Jerry, but neither she nor my in-laws would ever discuss him. Unfortunately, it took 33 years to find out what Kathy's parents had readily discerned about Jerry so many years ago. He was not an honorable man. Invariably, I began to make comparisons between Jerry and myself. Even pushing 60, Jerry was still well-proportioned and muscular, a product of the daily workouts he had practiced since high school. In addition to his physical prowess, which was emphasized by a t-shirt that showed off his muscles for effect, Jerry just looked good. He had kept all his hair, which was now highlighted by the gray streaks that made him look distinguished. I, on the other hand, was almost as opposite. I never developed the six-pack abs or the huge cannons on my arms. My hair had thinned out quite a bit, and I carried a spare tire around my gut for emergencies. If the truth be told, as painful as it is, I could see why Kathy was more impressed by my old friend than me. The only area that I had surpassed Jerry was in reliability and fidelity. Whereas I had kept my wife and job for 30 years and have never strayed, he had gone through 4 wives. At least 2 of his marriages had ended up in divorce court because of affairs. Add to that he was in re-anger of losing the automotive repair garage his father had left him because he cut corners and utilized substandard parts in his repairs. Since his father's death, he had managed to run a proud business once known for honesty and integrity into a cut-rate, fly-by-night operation. The only reason that I found out about the two of them was due to a disgruntled employee of Jerry who tracked me down to tell me about his boss and my wife. With the information he gave me, I confronted them and found out that indeed it was all true. The thing that hurt the most was when Kathy held on to him when I confronted them over the depth of their affair. Seeing that, I realized how much she cared for him, so I simply left my marriage with all the dignity I could muster. I would like to say that justice prevailed, but the divorce really went badly for me. Kathy got the house and a chunk of my retirement. I, on the other hand, got the satisfaction of knowing that I had always been square with her and had taken care of her right up to the end. From my initial discovery of their affair to the present day was a total of 18 months. Since the divorce became final, it was now approaching a year in just a few more days. I felt the anger rising again in my guts over the injustice of what they and the courts had done to me, but then I forced myself to regain my composure and returned the picture to its place on my desk. As I was replacing it, my eyes read the words on the little brass plaque at the bottom of the frame that Jerry had inscribed, "Friends Forever." Even in that, he had lied. The first employees began to arrive at work, and I turned myself away from personal issues and began to do my job. Work always seemed to be a tonic for me, and soon I had forgotten all about the two of them. The day went quickly, and about 15 minutes to quitting time my phone rang. Picking it up, I smartly answered, "Welcome to ABC Company. This is Ryan Brown speaking. How may I be of service to you?" The line remained silent for a few seconds, and I was about to hang up when her voice tentatively spoke. "Ryan, it's Kathy. Please don't hang up. You could have knocked me over with a feather, but I kept it together, and with as much composure as I could muster simply answered, 'What do you want, Kathy?'" The phone was again silent for another awkward few seconds before her voice once again came on the line. "Ryan, it's been nearly a year since the divorce, and I really need to see you. Could you come for dinner tonight?" I was shocked, and in a nasty tone that was unheard by her in my old life, I replied, "I don't think I really want to break bread with the man who stole my wife and the woman who so willingly became his concubine. However, I do thank you for your offer." Kathy shot back in an almost panicky voice, "Jerry will not be here, I promise. I really need to see you. Please, Ryan." I took a deep breath and asked the inevitable question, "Why, Kathy? What could possibly be so important that after a year you need to suddenly talk with me?" She hurriedly interjected, "I need to set the record straight on us, Ryan. I also truly miss you and want to see you again. Please, Ryan. I've even made your favorite dinner, pot roast and all the trimmings. I swear it will be just us and no strings attached. What do you say, Ryan?" When I did not answer immediately, she rejoined, "I remember that you used to be pretty daring. Have you changed that much?" I thought for a moment. "When you say we will be alone, where will he be?" She quizzically replied, "You mean Jerry?" My voice sounded hollow even to me as I said, "Yes." Her voice sounded sad as she began to speak again. "It's hard to believe that you still can't even speak his name, Ryan, but don't worry. He won't be home till very late. He is having trouble at the shop, so he has been working late. A lot." I was displeased, just listening to her talk about him with such a protective domestic attitude, and it got to me. I decided that I really didn't need the aggravation anymore, so I began, "Gee, Kathy, as much as I love your pot roast, I just don't." She cut me off, sensing my refusal. "Ryan, please. I'm sorry, but I need to speak to you. Give me a chance." Listening to the emotion in her voice, I decided against my better judgment to take her up on her offer. "Okay, Kathy, you win. What time do you want me to come over?" I could almost feel the relief in her voice as she hurriedly rejoined, "Come home at your regular time, all right? I'll see you then, and thank you, Ryan." What could I say but "You're welcome" and a quick goodbye? When I got out of work, the snow was still falling pretty good. I almost enjoyed the ride to my old home as it felt comfortable and brought me back to better times. I was surprised at how little things had changed in the old neighborhood. Somehow I just assumed that since my life had changed so much over the last year and a half that everything else must have changed too. The house looked good clothed in the white of snow. It gave it an unsoiled look, although I felt that its occupants now were as morally unclean as could be. The sun was going down early as it always did this time of year, and the lights were on inside, giving the house a warm glow. I noticed that there were no tire tracks in the snow on the driveway, so I concluded that my wife had taken the day off for this meeting. She must have been pretty sure that I was going to accept her offer. I shut the car off and had opened the car door when the porch light came on. There in the doorway stood my former wife, and I felt my heart involuntarily do a flip in my chest. No matter how much she had hurt me, there was no denying that I still loved her. As I got closer, her face seemed to glow, and she was smiling with genuine happiness. Thank God you came, Ryan. I was worried that you might have changed your mind. Come on in, sweetheart, and get out of the cold. I was confused as to why she was being so familiar with me. After all, we were divorced, and she was now living openly with my ex-best friend in the house I had bought. Sometimes I can't figure people out. Nonetheless, I followed her orders and entered into my old home. Again, I was surprised as things had not changed in the year and a half since I left. There were the same pictures on the wall, the same furniture, and even the same television set. Kathy came up and hugged me like it was the best moment of her life, but when she moved in to kiss me on the lips, I turned my face away. She stood back from me and gave me a look that told me she was hurt. However, she rebounded quickly and with realistic concern in her voice proclaimed, "My God, Ryan, you are skin and bone. You need to eat honey and put some meat back on those bones." I was sarcastic, but then again I wanted to be, well, losing weight just seems to go hand in hand with losing your home, your marriage, and your life. But I might be wrong on that. Her face again reflected the disappointment she was experiencing at this first meeting in a year, but she was a trooper and plodded on. "I am sorry about what happened between us, Ryan. You must believe that I never wanted to hurt you, but things just got out of control. I was hoping in the year we have been apart that your anger might have abated a little, so that we might try to make amends, but I can see I was wrong on that point. Listen, let's just have a good dinner, and see if we can pack some food into you, all right?" I looked at her and surprised myself for feeling sorry for her distress. By now, I was also awkwardly wondering why I had accepted her invitation, but as I was here, I decided to make the best of it and with sincerity responded, "I am sorry for my actions, Kathy. Please accept my apology for making this meeting uncomfortable. I would like to hear what you have to say, but can I freshen up first?" The light seemed to come back on in her eyes, and with almost a glee she responded, "Sure, Ryan. You know where the bathroom is. I have to go and attend to our dinner anyway." I smiled and then headed down the hall to the guest bathroom. Jerry had moved in with us about 6 months before my marital collapse. He had been staying in our guest room and therefore utilized the guest bathroom. When I went in, I mentally made a quick check of things to ascertain his personal belongings were there, but then left to use the master bathroom located in what used to be our bedroom. Returning to that room made me feel sad for all the good years we shared, but I drove those thoughts from my mind as I entered the bathroom. Just like the guest bathroom, it was impeccable. Kathy had cleaned both of them from top to bottom to ensure any inspection would yield just what she wanted me to believe. And that was Jerry was still residing in the guest room. As I opened the medicine cabinet, it struck me. The left half of it was empty. That could be because after I moved out, she never utilized my space, or it could mean that she recently cleaned out one half and forgot to spread her things out again. I found the idea of her not moving into the space formerly occupied by my toiletries for over a year to be rather far-fetched. The most logical explanation was that Kathy had moved Jerry's things out for tonight. After using the facilities and checking the beds in both rooms, I couldn't help but notice that they too were recently cleaned and changed. I then returned back to Kathy and dinner. I was surprised to find that she had set the dining room table instead of using the kitchen. As I noted this, she came out with a bottle of my favorite beer in hand, and then she spoke with a lilt in her voice. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes, Ryan. I thought you might like one of these while I'm getting everything out." I accepted the beer from her and wondered what she was setting me up for. "Thank you, Kathy. This will do very nicely." As she began to turn and move to the kitchen, I spoke again. "Where is Jerry staying these days?" She seemed to flinch momentarily, but quickly recovered as she lightly replied, "He still stays in the guest room, Ryan. We are just friends these days, and that is it." With that, she was gone, heading into the kitchen. Dinner was soon served, and as the first beer had gone down easily, Kathy quickly replaced it with a second one. True to her word, we did not speak of us or the troubles we have had over the last year and a half, but still managed to cover a respectable number of neutral subjects like work, health, food, and friends we used to share together when we were a couple. All in all, the supper went well, as did the next 2 beers that she supplied me, as well as a second helping of pot roast, which made my taste buds miss my marriage all over again. After tonight, it would take a while to consume the frozen dinners which had become my lot in life with any relish. Finally, with the neutral subjects exhausted and feeling full and content for the first time in a year, she chose to initiate her real agenda. "Ryan, it has been a year now, honey, and I was hoping that you might have gotten over it enough so that we might talk about us." I felt the relaxing effect of the beers begin to wear off as I retorted, "There is no us. Besides, getting over the trauma of the 2 people you loved the most in the world betraying you is a little tough to do. This isn't like I caught a cold or broke a bone. For what you 2 did to me, there is no cure, and I doubt." short of having my memory destroyed by a surgical procedure that I will never get over it, as you so put it. However, we are here, so please say what you have to say." She seemed a little put off by my attitude and looked uncomfortable as she continued on. "All right, Ryan, I will. I don't know where to start this, so I guess an apology is the right place. I am sorry, Ryan, truly and regretfully, for ruining our marriage and hurting the best thing that ever came into my life, and that is you. I am not sure why I did what I did, but if I could go back and change things so that the affair never happened, you can rest assured that I would." She stopped suddenly and looked into my eyes as she spoke with firmness that I had only seen in her a few times in our entire marriage. "Ryan, I know I screwed up, and I know that it was my entire fault, but I need you back in my life. I dream about us every night. I think about us all the time, and I miss you in my life." She paused a second before she implored, "Ryan, I want another chance, and if you can see your way clear to granting it, I would do anything. Sign anything and take any type of test or counseling you want. I realize I have lost your trust and respect, but if there is any love left in you for me, I want to be your wife again. Please, honey, I want us back." She seemed drained and her face was tight with tension as she wrapped up her speech. To say I wasn't moved would be a lie, and to say that at some level I didn't want exactly what she was proposing would have been a bigger lie. But the pain and humiliation of the last year still weighed heavily on me. I noticed that she was gripping the table, and her knuckles were white just like they were in the picture on my desk. I took a swig of my beer as I took a few seconds to think about what she said and how I wanted to respond. Finally, I spoke. "Kathy, first off, let me just say that you are not solely to blame for the affair. You had help in the form of a well-practiced seducer I trusted since grade school. I knew him as a kid, and even then he loved to move in on girls who were going steady and take them from their boyfriends. It is like a big game for him. He earned the name Tarzan in school because he was the king of the jungle and would take his Jane wherever he and whenever he wanted. I had even stood by him in those days in a dozen fights from jilted boyfriends seeking revenge. He grew to hate the nickname Tarzan and would fight anyone who called him that to his face. Then he was my friend, and I felt that I had to stand by him even though he was in the wrong. Now, 40 years later, I am brutally aware of just how wrong I was and how twisted he is inside to go after those women he can't have. Maybe my marriage being ruined by him was some form of cosmic karma come back to repay me for the mistakes of my youth. I paused as I looked into her eyes, the same eyes I had loved since I first saw them. The one thing about Williams that I truly believed was that he would never try to steal my girl like he did with all the others. Boy, was I wrong on that one. I paused and realized that I wanted to hold her so badly it hurt. So you see, while it is noble of you to take the blame, you can in reality only take half of the responsibility. He must take his share of the blame also. Also, I think that you need to realize that he cannot and will not remain faithful to you. Her face showed a glimmer of hope as I continued. "Let me ask you this. If, and that is a big if, I agree to your request, how will you end it with the slug?" She fired her reply back rapidly as if she was prepared for this one. "I have told Jerry already that I want you back, and if you allow me back in your life, then he is out of mine totally." I knew her, and I believed her. However, I knew Jerry too, and he could be very persuasive in getting what he wanted. And if he was like me, then he would still want her and do whatever he needed to do to get her back. As Kathy stared hopefully at me, I suddenly had a question for her that I had never asked her since we first met. Throughout our years together, it just seemed unimportant, but now I needed to know. "Kathy, when Jerry introduced us, how well did you know him?" I noticed that she looked away as I asked the question, avoiding looking into my eyes. She recovered and looked directly at me as she hesitantly began. "Are you sure you really want to know, Ryan?" I nodded my head yes, and she took a deep breath and began. "All right, Ryan, I guess you deserve to know the whole truth. I met Jerry at a party. He was good-looking and funny, and I fell for him like a ton of bricks. I was a young girl, and he really did it for me. We had a relationship that lasted a total of 3 glorious weeks. That was about the span of his girlfriends back then." Her face looked sad as she pushed on. "I was in love with him by that time, and even though he told me we should see other people, I kept bugging him. After a while, he promised to fix me up with someone who he said I would really love, and was a better man for me than himself. Well, to be truthful, I only went along simply because I thought that once he saw me with another guy, he would realize his mistake and want me back. Well, that guy he was talking about was you, and he was right. I fell in love with you almost from the first date. I was also right that he would want me back, but it took 33 years for that to happen. Back then we both decided that you really never needed to know our past, and we kept it that way until now." She finished and looked utterly overcome. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just supremely disappointed. "So you two were lovers before we met, and then you both colluded to keep that bit of information from me since the day we met." I looked at her now, sitting with a downcast look. I have to give you credit for at least being able to keep a secret. I needed to ask her the next question, as it was the one that had been gnawing at me for over a year, but it would not come out. I started and stopped a few times before Kathy noticed my indecision, and with the clarity of a wife for over 30 years correctly read and interpreted my body language. She spoke with a sarcastic temerity. I know what you want to ask, Ryan, and don't you think I have asked myself the same question a million times since you found out? I don't know why we became lovers again. I could blame it on the fact you weren't there, or that the booze got to me, or that Jerry was irresistible, or maybe it was the fact that I remember how good a lover he was, or maybe it was a combination of all of these or none of these. To be truthful with you, I don't know. I'm sorry, that's all I can really tell you, but it's true. Well, that was at least an answer to what had been eating at me for over a year, but I would still always wonder if she was just trying to spare my feelings because she just felt that I was inadequate. Now I took a deep breath and started into painful territory. Are you still sleeping with him? Her face broadcast her feelings, and as I interpreted them, she was afraid of hurting me but didn't want to lie. With trepidation, she responded, yes. Even though I already instinctively knew the answer, it still hurt. I looked at her eyes and probed, why, Kathy? If I meant so much to you, and you still want me back, why are you still sleeping with him? Frankly, after all the pain he has caused, why is the jerk still living here? She looked a little wild as she retorted fast and loudly, because I need someone, Ryan. I am so alone I can't stand it. I miss you so much that I needed a substitute and he was here. That's why. With that, she broke down and began to sob with her head cradled in her hands and her body racked by the fury of her tears. I felt exhausted and knew that it was time to go home. I stood and walked around the table to help Kathy to her feet. Her tears were falling freely, and a part of me still wanted to ease her pain. She sniffled and stopped, and then reading me again. She threw her arms around me as if trying to keep me with her. I stood there like a log and did not reciprocate the hug. I finally broke away and spoke. I have to go home now, Kathy. She nodded, knowing what my words really meant, and then went into her protective wife mode. Wait. Before you go, let me get you some of the leftover pot roast to take home with you. She went to turn, and I held on to her hand. Never mind, Kathy. It's fine. I got my coat and was walking to the front door when it opened up, and in walked Jerry. His face showed apprehension and hope when he saw me, and he spoke as if we were still friends. Ryan, how have you been? I gazed at him with a look of shock. Why would you give a damn how I have been? You ruin my life, destroy our friendship, and steal my wife, and you ask me how I am. Are you insane? To his credit, he looked repentant. I'm sorry, Ryan. I never planned it. Well, it just seemed to happen and then take on a life of its own. He paused and then continued, Ryan, we both miss you in our lives. Is there any way we could forget what happened between us and just try to rebuild our friendship? I no longer cared whether Kathy would get hurt in this, as I had to ask, sure. However, let me ask you a question, all right? He actually had a hopeful look on his face and nodded his assent when I fired off my question. When was the last time you screwed her? Hope faded from his face, and he hemmed and hawed before he answered me. I don't remember, Ryan, honest. I knew Jerry from the old days, and I also knew when he was lying, so I pushed forth again. Come on, Tars, and you must remember the last time you put the meat to her. Isn't that what you used to say in high school after you scored some poor dumb schmuck's girlfriend, wasn't it? The word Tarzan hit home, and I could see anger flush his face, which is what I wanted. He puffed himself up and looked me straight in the eye as he coldly replied, Yeah, Ryan, that's what I used to say, and if you really want to know, I put the meat to her this morning, just like I do every morning. And she loved it, screaming for more of me inside her. He said it in anger, and I heard Kathy's inrush of breath as she realized what he had just spoken. He stopped talking and looked from me to Kathy, and then tried to cover his tracks. Ryan, I'm sorry. Kathy and I are through. We haven't had sex for months. Really? I just said that because you used that stupid name, and you know how much I hate it. I looked from him to her, and in that moment, it became clear. There was no hope for a reconciliation of my marriage or my friendship. Both were liars and always had been. I no longer wanted to see either one, but I had something to say. Look, both of you were my family for more years than I care to count, but it's over. I looked at Kathy. As my wife, you should have been more honest about Jerry when we first met. If you had, we might not be here now. You lied to me by omission. She looked panicked and started to reply, but I held up my hand and she stopped. Tonight, you gave me a convoluted reason for the why of it, but you never answered the big question of how. I turned to look at Jerry and could see his immature mind trying to make a joke about the mechanics of the sex act when I stopped him short when our eyes connected. You were my friend and I had your back for many years. If I meant so much to you, how could you have stolen something from me that was my most precious treasure? His eyes looked away from mine, and I could almost see the shame written on his face as he began to apologize once again until I told him to stop. Turning once again to my ex-wife, I spoke more gently than I felt. You were my wife. You promised to be faithful until death do us part. How could you have traded my love and devotion to you for a tawdry affair with a two-timing ape like Tarzan here? You told me that you loved me, but I don't see it. When you love someone, you work at keeping them in your life. You threw me away like a piece of unwanted trash. You lied when we got married, and you continued to lie right through until tonight. Kathy began to speak in a rush. Ryan, you're wrong. I do love you and I want to work this out. Jerry was a huge mistake, but I can make it right again. Please. She began to move towards me with her arms out to embrace me, but I moved back out of her reach. I pushed past Jerry and opened the front door. Kathy looked distraught while Jerry had recovered enough to just look sad. Before stepping out into the cold again, I looked at my ex and spoke in a formal tone. Thank you for a lovely dinner. I truly enjoyed it. Have a good life, as I doubt that we will be seeing each other again. I looked at Jerry and it looked like he was going to say something, but I cut him off. Well, Tarzan, looks like you got another Jane. Or should I say a Kathy? I just hope the price you paid was worth it. Before either could respond, I stepped out into the cold, shutting the door behind me. Reaching the car, I turned to see the front door fly open and Kathy in a determined voice call out, It's not over for us, Ryan. I want you back and I will get you back no matter how long it takes. Jerry is gone tomorrow. You are my man, and we still belong together. She was still calling out some nonsense as I started my car and backed out from the driveway. Tomorrow was another day, and I had to get up early for work. The office was cold when he arrived, but that was not unusual as the snow was falling outside, creating the illusion of a clean world. He loved the solitude of the office at this time of the day. Everything was so peaceful. He turned up the heat in the office and began making coffee. Today, however, his ritual was going to be different. As soon as he finished turning up the heat and putting the coffee on, he sat at his desk and picked up the picture he had fixated on over the last 18 months. He looked at it one last time, and then he muttered one word, enough. With that word, he set to work dismantling the frame and removing its contents. Looking at the loose picture one last time, he tore it into small pieces and disposed of it in his trash can. Looking at the frame, he pondered on throwing it out too, but then rethought that idea. Instead of throwing it away, he put it back on the desk empty. Looking at it, he thought, enough grieving for what was. Now it's time to start living again. Fill that frame with new memories and forget the old ones. Thinking about it, he remembered that one of the secretaries had tried to set him up with a widow who was a friend of hers a month or so back. He decided then and there that he would ask her if that offer was still good when she arrived for work. He smiled to himself for the first time in a long time and savored the peace of the empty office and the smell and flavor of a fresh cup of coffee. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.